and.
But can that be done in the background?
I think we'll still have to check easily.
Okay.
We'll just give. I'm sorry. I'm really sorry about this. We're just taking an additional 5 to 7 minutes more just to see if we can get this rectified. Ajinkya?
We're not live right now, I think. Huh?
Yeah, okay. Ajinkya, you can hear us. Okay. Do you want to try sharing your screen? But your voice isn't going through. All right. Okay.
Is he in Mumbai or is he in some other part of the world?
All right. While we are resolving this issue, maybe we can start with another presentation. May I request Anandita to share her screen? Anandita Rangarajan will be speaking to us on her thesis project, which is titled as Hate Space Ghettos, the City Within the City, and the thesis code number is C07. Anandita? Anandita, are you here with us? Can you hear us? All right, is Shreya here? Shreya?
Can the rest of you hear us fine? Ainsley, are you still here?
Yes. Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, I think only the students are having trouble then.
Are all three having a trouble?
It seems like that.
Shreya, are you here?
No, none of them are responding.
Okay, can someone call Shreya and Anandita?
Hello?
Yes, Anandita. Hi.
Yeah. Hi, just a second.
Sure.
Would you like me to present now?
Yes, I would.
Yeah, just let me just.
Thank you.
Is the screen visible?
Yes, it is.
Yeah, I'll begin. A very good afternoon. Hate Space Ghettos deals with the deep-rooted inequalities and a history of religious and caste violence that has led to segregated urban spaces today. Within the Indian context, Ahmedabad appears to be the most segregated city, also housing the country's largest Muslim ghetto called Johapura. But segregation isn't a recent concept in the city. It has a history of self-determined segregation of communities. This could be seen in the poles of the old walled city which were voluntary residential clusters based on caste and religion. We also notice this as the city grows west and residential areas like Hindu colony and Muslim society were created. The change actually began from a period of communal violence starting in the 1960s that reorganized the city on religious lines. In the violence, many Muslims were pushed out of mixed neighborhoods or chose to move to the new ghetto that started forming on the outskirts. The 2002 riots in particular changed the social geography of Ahmedabad forever. We see segregation manifesting in cities in three ways. The gated community is defined by power and wealth, called citadels. The poles of the old city based on caste, ethnicity, or religion, called enclaves. And the ghetto, which is a result of caste, religious, or ethnic discrimination, forcing people to live in a particular area in the city. The relevance and urgency of this thesis lies in knowing that while Ahmedabad has the most extreme form of ghettoization, cities like Mumbai and Jaipur in India are showing similar trends. Over 60% of Ahmedabad's Muslim population is currently living in a small concentrated area, and this is Johapura. Located on the fringes of the city, it is far from major institutions and in close proximity to toxic infrastructure. Its immediate context also creates hostile conditions, landlocked by Hindu-dominated areas and waste infrastructure like sewage treatment plants. The most disturbing edge, however, is along the north of the ghetto, where the Hindu community living there has built a 6-meter boundary wall to separate themselves from the ghetto. It lacks access to good transport infrastructure, its landscape is dreary and barely meets standards of open spaces, and its built environment ranges from slums to high-end gated communities, indicating that people from all socio-economic backgrounds live here, much like what was seen in Jewish ghettos of Nazi Germany. Therefore, when social practices have a direct effect on conditions of the built environment, and the spatial location in the city of a community further worsens its social conditions, architecture must strive to evolve as a practice beyond the design of static buildings. This thesis thus finds the role of architecture as a method of political and social critique. The wall built by the city to keep the people within the confines of the ghetto becomes a symbol of despair, a lack of identity, and their inability to choose interface with the city. The intent of this thesis is to invert these very conditions of confinement, freedom, and social exclusion for the ghetto. Through collages, possible relationships of the boundary of the ghetto and the city are explored. It attempts to take the idea of a voluntary exclusionary periphery and test its limits through an architectural proposal. Could this very act of building a boundary now be seen as a way of strengthening identities in cities? And if so, what could be a framework for such a speculation? The extents of Johapura are demarcated. A continuous peripheral road around the edge opens up opportunities for interface with neighboring communities. 4 vehicular entries into the site are created. The periphery is then populated with a series of institutions that a city would contain, making the somewhat loose edges of the ghetto now more tangible. These then become anchors to the infill coming between them, which is imagined as housing the people of Johapura. The peripheral social housing model thus also hopes to erase the inequalities found within the ghetto as well. The housing can be built as single row, double row, or partially connected structures, and the various ways in which it takes shape allows for many possibilities of the master plan to develop in the future. The sections represent the way in which the periphery creates a central void and is used for farming, as spaces of recreation, and open spaces for children. The controlled engagement of the periphery and the city leads to a gateway typology as well. In an attempt to building a new future for themselves, ideas of self-reliance and sustenance are also explored, and systems have been derived for recycling wastewater, reusing rainwater, food production, energy generation, as well as waste management. To fulfill the infrastructure needs of the community, the tower provides program possibilities that one would find in a city. The sub-programs of each amenity are then arranged in a matrix that suggests if they are more public or private. And the towers are thus combinations of varied programs that attempt to amplify identity and interface. Moving on to the construction of each tower. A 25 by 25 meter footprint is established, within which a 2-bay core includes the services. Structural systems include flat slabs, trabeated beam columns, and jack arches. The envelope of the building is an 800 mm thick debris concrete wall generated out of the brick and concrete debris. In doing so, it creates a walling system that builds new identities out of old debris from site. For the project, 3 towers are detailed along the border edge between Johapura and Vejalpur. This becomes the first site of intervention owing to its greater vulnerability and hostility from the outside city. We begin with the cultural tower. Its monolithic nature is suggestive of bastions at a periphery, while it strategically engages with the city at upper levels. And as the housing begins to enclose this periphery, the ghetto starts becoming a world of its own within. The development of the building can be understood as a series of diagrams explaining its access from the city and massing. The programs include informal gathering spaces, market and women's incubation center, a women's center, auditorium, and a prayer space. From the street, one can walk through the building as a way to enter the site, and the park edge becomes a social space in the evenings for the community. The informal market is organized around a central atrium, and overlooking spaces maintain a constant relationship between the varied public activities in the building. At the third level is the Women's Center, aimed at empowering the women of the community and negotiating their role and place in the rebuilding of a larger identity of the ghetto. The auditorium acts as a point of interface with the city, allowing for shared events to take place. The prayer space at the top creates a sacred space which is disconnected from the city. Sectionally as well, the building tries to negotiate shared spaces between programs, while also developing a distinct response to the outside as well as the park. The idea of identity is further explored through materiality. The cotton steel clad fenestration ages with time, thereby allowing the building to take on new identities as the ghetto ages. The next is the infrastructure tower, which holds a gateway to the inside, making an important landmark to enter into the site. From within, the park continues up the building through green terraces. The programs included here are a water department, prayer space, municipal offices, hydroponics and terrace farming, an observation deck, and water tanks. The pedestrian thoroughfare at the ground level leads to an information desk and then opens out to the void, allowing people from the city to come into the ghetto. The building also contributes to sustainability systems by creating spaces for hydroponics and terrace farming. The observation deck at the top allows views of the desirable transformation of the ghetto. The section cuts through the pedestrian thoroughfare and shows the observation deck, both becoming a space for people of the ghetto and city to meet. The last tower is the educational center. The programs in this include a recreation center, a madrasa, a prayer space, an outdoor play area, and a library. Sectionally, this tower attempts to combine spaces of religious teachings at the madrasa, mainstream education, as well as a recreation center for the youth. The study hall of the madrasa projects out to the city with glazing that gives people an opportunity to look within and hopefully also allow some prejudices of religious education to be done away with. The public library at the top allows for different kinds of people to meet as they share the same space. With every new edge of the ghetto developed, there grows strength and resilience of a hopeful community. However, the onus of whether a ghetto becomes a city of its own lies with those on the outside. Its hostile edges turn into fortifications, while the others remain dotted with institutions that it can share with the city. And yet there remains discrimination threatening marginalized communities. And with each new ghetto formed lies the potential for another city to emerge. How many walls will be built before we realize the problem was the wall to begin with? Thank you.
Thank you, Anandita. We will now take the comments and suggestions and questions as well from the panelists.
Thanks, Anandita, for a very intriguing project and a very interesting one. Not many questions, but I really enjoyed the way you looked at these buildings, which were almost really behaved like outposts.
Anandita, is
Yeah.
Sumitra's voice clear, or you're getting some?
No, I'm getting a slight lag, but I'm not sure what that is.
Sumitra, there's something with.
Is it clear now, or it's still bad?
No, it's still breaking a bit.
Okay. So maybe Anuradha or Young, you want to start? I will reconnect. Yeah.
Sure, Soumitra. Anandita, I really enjoyed listening to you. So did you say there were 25 towers that you were proposing?
No, there are 67.
67, and they are all cross-programmed differently, and you've shown us, I
They're
think,
all
3.
Yes, I've detailed 3, but the program matrix suggests the varied cross programs that could occur.
Right, right. And how are they allocated, or what is the ownership leasing model? Like, how did you think that through?
So I imagine this as a way of the ghetto to sort of come together as a community to develop infrastructure for itself. And this is not a unique sort of model, because Bhapara in particular has already been striving for self-sufficiency and resilience, particularly because the state has ignored its infrastructure responsibilities in the ghetto. So charitable trusts from within and privately owned groups have actually already started contributing to create some sort of communal infrastructure. So this is seen more like an extension of that model, hypothetically, where the whole ghetto is willing to erase the inequalities within itself and come together to sort of assert its identity within the city and provide for everybody within the ghetto equally. Because while there is differences in the ghetto, everybody, in spite of their socio-economic background, remains marginalized in terms of religion with respect to the city. So by using that as that common denominator which holds everyone together, it's seen as something that will bring the people, as one and drive the project.
Yeah, I just think I'm just trying to understand it a little bit more. And so the prayer spaces that are they multi-faith? Are the allocations done on a multi-faith? Different religions. How is it done?
No, in the prayer spaces currently, these are for the community within. So these are Muslim prayer spaces, but each tower can take on its own possible roles in the future. So if there were to be an edge where there is a sort of relationship of communal praying that develops between the inside and the outside, then the tower is free to, evolve its program in that manner.
Right. And is it fair to say that the project is more kind of speculative, utopian? It's not intended to be read as a finished project. Is it fair to say that?
No.
Yeah. Yeah, okay, good. No, thank you. I enjoyed it, Anantha. Thank you very much. And I really like some of the renderings, because it really, you could really kind of occupy these spaces, and reminds me a little bit of the follies, Shumi's follies around. But this is a lot more. This is a political and a very productive political statement. So thank you very much for that brave proposition. Thank you.
Nidita, thank you so much. I completely agree. It's very strong and very political project, very radical in its execution, and indeed it's a speculative project. I think what I really liked about it is that you have a very clear idea of what architecture could be or should be. And what I also liked that during your presentation, not only now, but when we were kind of judging the projects, I was really thrown off guard several times. I was like, is she really enforcing a wall to kind of emphasize the ghetto here, or how she's going to deal with that? So for me, it was very intriguing, and I like the radicality that you chose for. I think these are the type of ideas and projects that really push the discipline forward as well, and that I think is probably when you become a professional architect and establish maybe an office or work in an office. These are difficult, of course, to deal with in a practical sense. So that's why I really treasure these type of projects. That students, that professionals, kind of deal with these notions of radicality. So I just want to applaud you for a very strong project. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, Anandita. Is the voice clear now?
Yeah,
great. Really enjoyed the project, and Yeah, it almost, yeah, similarities with, I think Anuradha already spoke about the police and the project in Paris. And also perhaps reminded me in some ways of even the project by Stephen Hall, which I think sort of predates, it's more a studio project rather than, which is between the forest and the city. And so I think this threshold is, it's a very interesting thought. Um, so just a question at the, like I noticed that your prayer space was actually at the upper level. Was there a
Yes.
particular reason and not on the ground? The question being that, does this threshold mediate um, adequately? I mean, they're beautifully drawn. I must commend you for the drawings. I really enjoyed them. So is there an idea of mediation which could be stronger if places of worship, because also places of worship tend to contract and expand. They are not a fixed number ever. So keeping that in mind, how do you see the threshold works?
I think this was a difficult question to address during the project as well, because, like you said, on one hand, you're actually sort of trying to build a bastion in what I've called it, something which can be, shut off from the outside and which has an engagement with the city, but in a very limited sort of manner. So I think it's because of that maybe the publicness of possibilities within the building are somewhat limited. While I think I've tried to include them at various locations where I feel spaces like auditoriums or things like that, or large informal markets on plinths are opportunities for the city to come in within. I also looked at the prayer space actually as more of an identity defining sort of program, and therefore it comes in one project it's at the topmost level, in the other it's somewhere in between. So in each of them it's sort of trying to negotiate a different identity with the people who are going to visit it. So if it were something that you cross as you're going up to the observation deck, it becomes a more public identity which you are, advocating. But in the women's center, for example, if the women are praying at the top, they may be, more secluded than the other sort of prayer spaces. So I think the programming and the arrangement of programs really was a question of how much public engagement do you want each building to have, and at what level does that public sort of flow through the building? Like, what are the spaces the public from the outside is going to occupy, and what are the spaces the public from the inside is actually going to use? So, and because these are also seen as part of maybe in the speculative imagination a larger fortification, they can't really completely open out their ground levels and allow the city to come in. So what it wants to do is, at the current stage, you build it as a limited engagement with city and the ghetto, and in probably in the future you can expand or change, or the newer towers which are built based on different conditions on the outside could then be programmed a little more differently.
So very, very interesting kind of similarities, and it's interesting. Yon had shown the Super Studio drawing.
Yeah.
And also reminded me of, I think, Kulas's final year project at the AA, and yeah, and also the bird houses, which are generally towers, which is not only a traditional thing, but it's also, and very particularly in Ahmedabad, and in the south they really become really like towers, which are completely perforated. So my question was actually about the facade. Do you see that the facades actually react to the inside and the outside? And I will close with the last thing. Do you imagine that these kind of pulleys could be actually structural mechanisms which are later going to support, like one of your drawings showed these connecting bars between these, that they could actually be structural mechanisms which would later even be the supports of what starts making the new thresholds in the sky?
I think in terms of the structural supports, in the master plan, they are imagined as the anchor points. So whether so they will be what hold the infill together, and that's why they're placed also at 150 meters. Like each one of them is actually the same repetition again and again. So it is allowing for a particular type of housing to actually develop in between this, and take structural cues from this. What was the second part of the question?
No, I think these are just. I'm just throwing up some thoughts, so it's fine. You can take your time to recollect.
Facade. It was a facade. Yeah. So I think in the first building, it's actually evident in the view of the street and the park in the way in which the facade reacts to the condition that it is going to be up against. So on the street edge, very deliberately, it's been designed as more monolithic with very limited punctures, also alluding to what we imagine as seeing, along fort walls, where we don't really see massive punctures at ground levels, and it may or may not open up at the upper level. And the inside, actually, contrary to this, has much larger openings. It also uses glazing more liberally, and it's purely because it is actually responding to the ghetto itself. It's responding to the people who have actually contributed to building this. And one vague idea of using glass, on these large facades was also that it's a constant reflection of how the ghetto within is developing. The building facade is actually constantly reflecting what is happening on the inside, whereas on the street edge, it is still more robust, and it actually anchors the project on the ground.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Anandita. There's a question for you from Rashi Dave. So let me read that out to you. She says, thank you for the lovely presentation. Do you feel that the master plan suggests a new kind of fortification that could further separate the ghetto from the city?
Yeah, I mean, that is the crux of the project. It's what it's trying to do. On one hand, it is so. If you look at the project as a whole, in the ambiguity of what happens to the master plan, I'm imagining that there is a very ethical and moral choice that the city has to make on how it continues to treat the ghetto, and whether it improves the conditions at the edges or it continues to become more hostile. And which is why the last slide sort of talks about the edges which are hostile become fortifications, and the edges which have more positive conditions will only remain as shared public programs. So yes, in terms of the master plan, it is designed to hypothetically create the possibility of a large fortification, but I'm not speculating on what is going to happen. I'm leaving that up to the viewer at the end to sort of for themselves decide where they feel the future of the ghetto lies, and it ends at that.
Thank you. I'd like to invite Ajinkya Dekane, who will be speaking to us on his thesis project, which is titled as Exhuming the Navayana Assertion, Architecture. Yes.
To interrupt, but I think Shreya will have to go up first.
Okay.
Yes, trying to download his presentation on a new device.
Okay.
Hello. Hi. Am I audible now?
Oh,
yes, you are.
Yeah. Okay. So then I can go after this.
All right. Cool. Sorry.
So would you want to go?
Yeah, but just I have logged in through another account. It's also called Ajinkya, so you can make both of us the presenter. So I'll share my screen from other laptop and I'll talk from other.
Yeah, Ajinkya, that one has also been made a presenter.
Yeah.
If you see.
Thanks a lot.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot.
Great.
So will you be presenting now, or should I?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Okay. So Ajinkya's thesis topic is on exhuming the Navayana assertion, architecture against counter-revolution. The thesis code number is CO4.
Ajinkya, can you just go full screen?
I have, but it's not reflecting on the.
Oh no, you'll need to share your entire desktop and not just the PowerPoint.
Okay, got it.
Yes, perfect.
Yeah. There's a little bit of a lag, I feel, but so just tell me when I can start.
I think you can start, Ajinkya. We can see the screen.
Okay. So the title of my thesis is the Navyana assertion refers to the mass conversion movement that Ambedkar began in 1956 by converting with almost 500,000 people in Nagpur. However, this revolution churned by Ambedkar since his death has been countered by reducing him down to the father of constitution and other such abstract labels being slapped on the entire Dalit movement, which essentially has been nothing but a mortal conflict against Hinduism and its adherents. So my project is about understanding how architecture is being used as a tool to counter this assertion, and hence I'm looking at how architecture itself can be used to exhume it back. So my thesis is a critique of the Hindu Mill Ambedkar Memorial and to respond to the kind of politics that would evolve with the construction of a Dalit memorial commissioned by the current government, which comes with a Hindu Rashtra agenda within this neighborhood of Shivaji Park, which is essentially a strictly upper caste Hindu ghetto. So, to reduce down my entire research to the limited time of this presentation, I'm looking at the idea of how memorials for the marginalized cannot be commissioned by the oppressors, but produced by assertions from within the community. So I think there's a little bit of a lag between my presentation. I'm changing the screen very soon. But so anyway, I'll go ahead. So Chaityabhumi is a small stupa constructed at the edge of a Hindu crematorium where Ambedkar's body was cremated. While facing strong opposition to allow land for a memorial to being constructed on this site, the people collected small donations from the community and built this memorial themselves through protests and asserting their own right on this land. So in this slide, you can see the red portion is my site. Number one is the existing stupa of Chaityabhumi. Number two is the existing gate, and number three is Shivaji Park. And it's all about creating a connection between the site, the Chaityabhumi, the gate, and the Shivaji Park through the kind of programs that evolve in the everyday and the exodus. So Chaityabhumi functions within these two distinct realms of the everyday, which is conversion and which is the ceremony of converting to Navyana Buddhism, and the exodus, which is the mega gathering of more than 2 million people on 6th of December every year. And my intervention becomes about responding to the distinctness of these two programs of the everyday and the exodus. So there's like a lot of lag between my slides, but so this is a drawing of how Chaityabhumi connects to Shivaji Park through the corridor of the Exodus. These are the kind of activities that happen. These are the kind of, so we see that we see that most of these bookstores that come up in Shivaji Park are actually bookstores which sell some of the most radical anti-caste, anti-fascist literature, and in a single day books worth lakhs are being sold. So this is how the line forms to go inside Chaityabhumi. So we see that Chaityabhumi also becomes a point of origin of various protests which begin from that golden color gate, also called as Torna, and then move out into the city. So so now we come to the program of the everyday of Chaityabhumi, which is essentially conversion ceremonies from Hinduism to Buddhism. So Ambedkar writes this book and criticizes the existing canons of Buddhism as being corrupt and creates his own new canon called Navyana. And to convert to Navyana, you have to take certain vows, which is why people go to Chaityabhumi to take these vows. And these vows are all about erasing your past, of your ties with Hinduism, with the books, with the idols, and everything. So people usually we see that when they come to Chaityabhumi, they take these vows and they bring with them the idols of Hindu gods and goddesses, and they dump them into the sea and then go into Chaityabhumi to take these vows. So then it makes me wonder, why would a government which openly has a Hindu Rashtra agenda suddenly start building Ambedkar memorials all over the country? So it's all about countering the actual assertion, and by building a new memorial in front of a memorial which is Chaitanya that already exists on the site. So my thesis becomes about exploring this memorial and not creating a new memorial, but rather creating an extension to this existing memorial. So then I began drawing out my intervention, and I always had this idea of going underground and exhuming out the history. So as a move on the site, I create an incision and I lift up the ground as if you have to exhume something. Then I create a straight fixed axis from the center to go towards Chaitanya, which would be the axis for conversion, and then another temporary route to go from the gate to the Chaitanya and then to Shivaji Park on 6th of December. So here you can see how the route of movement usually goes from to this for conversion to the sea first, then to the Chaitanya and then out, and on how I'm recreating this whole route of movement which happens in this neighborhood on the everyday as well as on the Exodus. So this is how the building sits on the side. I'm just waiting for the lag to So how I've divided my building as 1/3 of the garden, which responds to the city, 1/3 of the program, and 1/3 of a tank which already existed on the site, which I just expanded. And we can see how the route of movement from the central street goes from 1 to 3, and at around 5 and 6, I've created a book dump where people can actually throw away books like Manusmriti or Bhagavad or any books which have been tying them to their oppressive past, and then go towards Chaitanya through a narrow bridge, look towards the sea, and it's also kind of reminiscent of Ambedkar burning down Manusmriti as an act of assertion. While before taking water from the Mahat tank, the water tank is also supposed to resemble or signify that in a way. So I'll just breeze through my sections. I can always, it's not possible for me to actually explain much of it right now, but I can always come back to them if there's anything. So I'm explaining the book dump happens right underneath the statue of Ambedkar, and so from this book dump, all the books are taken down to the right hand side of this building where I've created a recycling unit and a printing press. So all of these books basically get recycled within the building. All of these books of which are tying one down to the oppressive past are recycled and printed into new books, which are then used in the classrooms of the same building. So while a person takes this route for self-conversion of a spiritual conversion, the material that he or she has left behind is also being converted into something new, on which a new future could be written on. And it's all about leaving behind your history and taking the narrow bridge into this massive Torna and going towards the sea and looking towards a new future, and then going into Chaitanya to take up a new religion. And I'm kind of imagining what kind of conversations would evolve in this kind of a space where the city has never allowed. I was always in a conflict of whether or not to have a statue of Ambedkar as the existing proposal, but I knew how statues form the symbols of assertion for marginalized people, how within bastis people assert their space with small busts. So I eventually settled down on this one statue which sits on the center part of the project of the building. So I'm imagining how there would be programs even tucked in between between this gate where there are 3 libraries on top on these horizontal bars, and there's one library in the bottom where there are these skylights where in the bottommost library the most darkest literature, autobiographies written by Dalit people, written by people who are performing manual scavenging are kept. When one sits down and sits there and looks up onto the skylight, it almost feels like you're looking up through a manhole. And there could be people who could also be, while taking that route of conversion, look down and see what's underneath. So I can show it to you properly in a view. And then it's also about then going down from this library of oppression up to this library of emancipation, which is up in the sky and looking towards an open sea. So in the number one and number two, I've shown how the basement library is happening. This is how the building sits on the site. So this is where the entire printing press and the recycling is happening, while and smaller studios for people to hire. So it's uh, and then there are these blue carts, which are basically nothing but porta cabins, which could be used as mobile libraries, where they throughout the year they sit on the site, but on one particular day of 6th of December, all of these carts basically move out into the city and get plugged in, and which creates a route of which creates space for that kind of a congregation, or not just congregation, but a route of movement of 6th December to happen through this lane and go inside Chaitya-Bhumi. And this also reminds me, this idea for this very street comes from my study of Abhyas Gali, which is in Varli, which is very close by to the site, where kids who don't have space in their house usually take up an entire street and form it into an Abhyas Gali. So I'm thinking like throughout the year, this whole street could form into that Abhyas Gali, and on one particular day when all of these carts are cleared, the whole street could allow that kind of an access or a funneling of the crowd to happen.
Ajinkya?
Yeah?
Hi. Your time is up. I would request you to just scroll through the remaining slides.
Yeah, I'm done. These
sure.
are just some of the technical
All right, sure. Thank you.
Yeah, that's it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ajinkya. Can you hear us, Ajinkya?
Yeah, I can hear you, but I'm not able to turn my off.
Right.
Okay, fine.
Soumitra, your voice is again that same thing.
Oh God. Please go for it. Connect.
You sound like an alien. Anuradha, you have to unmute yourself.
Bjorn, do you want to go first?
Sure. Ankia, how do I pronounce your name? Sorry about that.
It's Ajinkya.
Ajinka, sorry about that.
That's right.
Thank you so much for your presentation. I think just like with the previous one, it's very strong and very powerful, very political. I wrote down a volcano of ideas, because I think there's ideas of monumentality, of religion, of political tension, of empowerment, of recycling. So I think it's very layered and very strong in that sense. I had two questions. First, the previous presentation was very much a speculative kind of design project. Do you perceive this project as well as a speculative project? And the second, you mentioned the ideas of the library. And I was curious if you thought about who selects and who judges, because I think you have this layer of different libraries, what goes where, and I was curious if you have any thoughts about that.
Yeah. So to answer the first question, I think that it is speculative because I really don't know what language to use. Towards the end of my design process, I had completely given up on it because there is no language in architecture created. So we are talking about a community which has never had any property rights since 3000 years. They have no share in creation of any architectural language, any other form of language. It's all language that has been taken from the oppressors. So it is, or I can never say that it is a very hard and core determined project because I eventually gave up on how do I develop the language for this project, or what would be the design solution, because I really couldn't think of a solution, because the problem, when every problem intersects with another problem. And so eventually what I settled on was through interviews with people from the community who work on the field, and the ideas are still extremely, I feel they're not complete, and I don't think they will ever be complete. So, but I think this has just given me a direction to think towards in my whole as an entire thought process. I don't really think of this project as something that will end here. And this, to answer the second question, uh, what was it again? I'm sorry.
It was about the libraries.
The
I
libraries,
think
yeah.
you made some sort of a hierarchy in libraries. I was curious who selects, who judges.
Yeah. So basically, there are a lot of institutes, not institute, like I would say institutions, which are like the People's Education Society. There's a few Ambedkarite institutions which are operating in the country. I think the decision making of what books are kept, what is kept here, should come as a collective organization. There's the organization which operates Chaitya, which is run by Ambedkar's family. I think the decision should always come from the community. The space is exclusively by and for this community, and when we say that it's going to be a public space and then the decisions should be democratic, then I would say that no decisions in this country ever include the voice of the untouchables, the former untouchables. So the decision making should entirely happen by from people from the community, maybe representatives which are approved or maybe known from the community. So yeah, that's.
Thank you for that. It's very clear. Thank you for your presentation.
Thank you.
Anuradha, would you like to go in?
Okay, all right. Ajinkya, really enjoyed your presentation. It was a great attempt at, your verbal presentation along with the graphic. I think I really understood the project now, and I think I agree with what Jon is saying. It's a very interesting, very political, very kind of a powerful project. I think it is interesting how you left the kind of the building language, the architectural language is fairly neutral, and as it should be. It shouldn't really force kind of an architectural vocabulary. I think the moments when you talk about the more experiential aspects, when we talk about when you're looking down or looking up, and I think those moments are very important in your architecture. I don't really have any questions. I think it's a very commendable effort, so thank you, Ajinkya.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ajinkya, for the presentation. I think you raised a question about the statue, and which, yeah, of course, we don't have an answer because there has been absolute obsessive preoccupation in the country from large statues. In some ways, I think you did point to the fact that the moment a memorial or recognition through a large statue happens.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm sorry to interrupt, but I can't hear.
Should I repeat myself?
Yeah, please.
Okay. What happened? I mean, that's my reading that possibly, I mean, whether it's a devious strategy, but as a pattern, what happens is the making of statues literally puts to rest any kind of continuity of thoughts and ideas of a person. So it's literally celebrating the death of ideas of a person by making statues. So I don't know. That's a very difficult thing to resolve. When I saw your scheme, I was very intrigued with. On some grounds, I was kind of extremely excited with the stupa gateway kind of idea taken for the building. But on the other side, I found that the building and the way you were using the ground with water was actually behaving exactly. It was again taking it away from people to make it a kind of a. It's a nice posture to, which is about healing the spirit with water. But on the other hand, it is also taking the whole place away from the people itself. So I think that's something which I would like you to comment on or think about, or maybe you already have some idea on that.
Yeah. So basically, I was questioned about this a lot. That there's a congregation of 2 million people happening here, and you're taking away all the space. My argument against this is that so the current agenda is to take away the people from Shivaji Park, which is twice the size of this land already. The entire crowd is very easily absorbed in Shivaji Park, but the people don't want them there because people say that these are the ugly, these are the impure, untouchable people who have infiltrated in our place, and they have to dump them out into some other area. So if I actually open out my side, this 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 whole uh, this whole agenda of people to move the crowd away from Shivaji Park might work. Secondly, the water body actually represents, in a way, the Mahad tank, which is coming from the Mahad Satyagraha, where this tank, which was not open for untouchables, was made done that, and the whole idea of burning Manusmriti, then going down to take water. It's all about following that same whole history. Thirdly, I feel that I don't, even if I just block out this entire land and if I don't give any land for this particular community in this space, there should be land in every other corner of the city. I don't think that taking away, we, I think we should be able to assert space in not in always considering, oh, itna mila hai, so now we should make this productive. we want we deserve a lot more. We deserve land in every part of the city, where if I'm making a tank here, it will not affect if we have enough land everywhere, enough memorials everywhere, enough libraries everywhere. And this idea that now you have got this, so you should make the most of it and you should open it out for the city in itself, I feel I don't agree with that.
So would you say that so if we were looking at a kind of recognition of the problem, or a very long history of this kind of injustice, and to at least come to power or to come to a level ground where there remains no difference between any two people. Um, because in some ways, I think what also happens is that when identities are uh, become so engaged in their kind of revivalism, or uh, if, when does one find ground to negotiate? So I'm seeing it as architectural. I'm not seeing it as a political problem. Of course, I am concerned how much water you will fill in those tanks, which will take away a lot of water from the city. But I don't take me seriously on that. But yeah, but it does take away substantial water. So yeah, how to find the balance between place, neighborhood, and that the future for healing is not only about recognition but also about making connections, and whether architecture has a role to play in that, and maybe architecture has a role which is actually not to build a lot, or to build very little. So these are just, I mean, because we can talk about both sides of the coin endlessly, and I'm sure you've been going through this for the last 6 months.
Yeah. So, should I speak?
Yes, please do,
okay.
please.
So I don't really think that I'm anyone to answer this question. Also, because uh, firstly, I don't think I have answer to this, because it matters in projects which are political, which are talking about identities. It matters what is the identity of the person who is doing it. I myself come from this very community. I have grown up, I have lived, i have I have visited this annual event every year. I've grown up going to Chaitya. I have grown up in a caste ghetto, but I still don't have the answer to this. What is this point of negotiation? Even architecturally, I would say that people don't have water anywhere, and you, for once, when you are using it as a symbol of assertion, then again everyone is talking about, oh, you're using up the water. You don't give the people who are working in sewers, they don't get water to clean themselves. and then one can just say that, oh, you're using up so much water, but then again it's shifting the blame on the victim. So I feel the requirement, what the necessity is, that people from our community to be in power, in situations of positions of power, in the discourse of architecture, in the knowledge creation of architecture, and then we might have some ideas, some solutions, some answers which have come collectively from the community, from people who have architectural education, understanding of planning from the community. I don't think upper caste people can ever have any say in especially in projects which deal with identities. I think it's very important of who is making for whom and who is talking on behalf of whom. So still, since today, at today's time, we don't have that kind of representation, we don't have that kind of knowledge resource, we really don't think that, I don't think I have an answer for that question, and it's something that grapples me every day. Yeah.
Thanks, Ajinkya. Yeah, you. I mean, these are questions which will remain strongly in this context. So almost similar to the question whether if it is a community-based design, what is the role of the architect? Is it to enable or to translate, or is it to overwhelm them with what you decide for them? So yeah, I think basically it's going to be a negotiated struggle to find the way forward.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, all of you. Our next presenter.
Sarah, I just have a question for him. I typed it in, but I think
so sorry.
there's a lag.
Oh, yeah,
no, it's okay.
Yeah.
So Ajinkya, if you look at the work of Francis Kere in the Gando School, which he does, where he actually goes to Berlin, studies architecture, comes back, teaches the people how to put together building, structure, etc., and builds institutions for them. Would you as a budding architect from the community actually look at this process rather than taking the stance of saying I don't know what to do as architecture for my people?
Yeah. Yeah, I would say that currently I don't know, but I don't think that I would take building knowledge from someone and teach building, because I don't think that it's because this problem intersects with also ownership of land, ownership of property, and that cannot just be solved by a knowledge of building. Again, the knowledge of building has been stolen from the Shudra community, who are the artisans, who are the builders. And I think all of this knowledge, I think me as a budding architect would probably want to involve with all kinds of professionals from the community and find all solutions together. I think poets can provide solutions for architecture. I think artists can. I think dancers can. I don't think that I personally would want to take any part of, especially from any other marginalized community, to take their knowledge of building and bring it somewhere and give it, because even if we have the knowledge to build, we don't have the land to build, and that will only be solved through policy making, through other solutions. So me, as a budding architect, I would say that I would want to collaborate with people from various fields, and then look for how to solve these intersections together. I don't think it's like a one it's only about architecture, or architecture in itself is only about architecture in any way.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, thank you.
Since we have no other questions here, thank you, Ajinkya, thank you all of you. Shreya.
Hi.
Shreya Bansal. Hi. She will be speaking on her thesis topic, which is titled as The Paradox of Recognition, a case of the Hijra community in Malwani. Her thesis code number is B17.
Hi. Is my screen visible?
Yes, it is.
You can go
That is
full
that?
screen. You can go full screen.
I already did that.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, thanks.
All right. There might be a lag, so please let me know if anything.
Sure, we'll do that.
Hi, good afternoon. So my thesis is titled The Paradox of Recognition, a case of the Hijra community in Malbani. It began with an inquiry into the transgender community, as we all know about them and have had multiple encounters, yet know very little about the community. The transgender community has reached phenomenal levels of otherness, so much so that they're still fighting for their basic human rights today in 2021, hence the title Paradox of Recognition. So the thesis explores the construction of gender through a unique group that has recorded history of 4,000 years in India, more than any other part of the world. So starting with the Mughal period, where the community was really valued and they was political advisors to the kings, etc. While when the British came in, the sort of stance completely changed, where they were categorized as wandering tribes and they were criminalized in under the Criminal Tribes Act, and they were almost imposed on a legal panopticon. And that was the sort of morality with the transgender community that was imposed to the country. And then today, in the contemporary period, with the judgments for the community, that it seems to be that the bills which are actually designed to be protecting the community are further oppressing and institutionalizing the violations that are already happening on the community. So this literature helped me in understanding the changing position of transgenders through different eras and the impact that the state has on their lives. So, going further, try to explore what the community is about. So, the Hijras often leave their parental homes and join the Gharana system, where it is a chosen family that they decide for themselves and they live within with other Hijras. So, I'm raising a question if we can challenge this heteronormativity and reimagine what a family is, what a marriage is, and what kinship is. Need for independence. So, a transgender who does not associate with the Hijra community or does not associate with their parental home can almost not exist in this country, because there are no systems to sort of support any transgender. So I'm questioning if we can another system of community living devoid of the hierarchies of the Gharana system, can it coexist for the transgenders? Living on extreme margins, the community is extremely marginalized in terms of the professions they're involved in. They've been involved in begging and sex work over decades, and they have been criminalized in many ways for that. So, can we look at skill development programs for the community, and can a better built environment support their existing means of livelihood? And unprincipled exclusions in terms of access to public spaces. So, can public spaces be planned in a way that they're more inclusive, such that they're accessible and safe for everyone? So, this literature is limited to a theoretical and legal understanding and does not delve into spatial implications. So, my thesis sort of aims to address this gap through an ethnographic study. So, with my interviews on site, I understood how a life of a hijra would be. So, a narrative as similar as this would be one, they leave their home at an early age and join a gharana system, and they are often affiliated with the gharana and certain NGOs that work with the community. So the methodology I'm using for my project was an ethnographic one to understand the social structures and shared beliefs of the community, because they are such a secretive and marginalized nature that it is very difficult to break into them. So I used uh, uh, collaborate with certain NGOs that were working with the community. I located these 4 sites in Mumbai where the transgenders population heavily live, and I narrowed down to the Malvani site, which is located in Malad, Mumbai. So these are the 2 NGOs that I was collaborating with, located in Malvani, that work especially with the transgender community. So this is the mapping done of the community by these NGOs, such that you can see these blocks. Each block shows the number of transgenders that live in each block, what their profession is, if they're involved in sex work or begging,
how many of them live together in one house, what are the public spaces that they use, be it NGO spaces or religious spaces, etc. So I am delayering this map on my sitemap to understand different aspects of their living. First, looking at dwelling spaces. So as you can see, the community is not concentrated on one spot. They rent out spaces wherever possible, so they spread out across the site. They often live in groups of 4 and 5 with you can see they practice different religions in one home. They often rent houses with a attached toilet and they pay extra money for that because they're not comfortable with using public toilets, which are binary toilets. They often live in shifts because of the kind of housing typology, very small homes where 4 or 5 people live together, and they work at daytime and nighttime, so they sort of live in shifts where at any point of time only 2 people are at home. So this is sort of typology of housing that the Hijras have in Malvani. Social spaces. So as you can see in the kind of density in the terms of living, the social spaces are very limited to smaller spaces, unlike the large maidans and parks. So parks and maidans are not very accessible to the community in terms of the sort of barriers they have, while they mostly socialize within indoor spaces, be it their homes, be it NGO spaces, and some temples and religious spaces. And taboo spaces would be the ones that they're involved in sex work in, so the kind of spaces they access for that. Be it abandoned spaces where they, which they use at night, or some sort of spaces where the NGOs get in touch with them for condom distribution. So can architecture enable normalizing the existing of gender non-conforming people within the community? So to look at architecture, what was possible, I thought there were 2 ways. First, to create an enclave, a space which would be especially for the community to thrive, which would be, which is very necessary. And the other one would be an inclusive public space, which would be open and accessible to everyone with certain reservations for the community. For my project, I have looked at the second alternative, which would be an inclusive public space, so as to create, which so there is the Transgender Welfare Board in Maharashtra, which has been set up recently on the basis of the one in Tamil Nadu, which has certain schemes for provisions of education, health, food, housing. So I'm using this model as a framework for my project. So looking at site, I am choosing the red marked site on this NCC Malvani region. This site in the 1981 development plan was reserved for public amenities, while the other space was public housing, which was done by the government. And even in the 2034 development plan, that space is currently reserved for public amenities, be it educational spaces, hospital spaces, and green spaces. The site is abutted by 2 roads. One, a major road, which is a bus road. I'm going to go here. So understanding the site, there's a major road on one side and a community pedestrian street on the other side. The site currently is gated on all sides, and there are very little access from the main road to the internal road. If development happened as per the DCR, there would be these high rises with larger spaces which would not be accessible and very limited entry and exit. While what I am proposing is a continuous public realm which would have certain lateral connections between the site and decentralized open spaces in built form. I'm just going to go further. The programs I'm looking at would be divided in these 4 categories, with the ground level being for everybody, while certain the upper level would have reservations for the marginalized communities. These are the intervention strategy diagrams. Creating public plazas, reserving the level for the marginalized communities, and a large roof to cover the structure. These are certain strategies which are responding to the streets and the natures. So an embedded public amphitheater in the school complex, public parks and amenities accessible to everyone, shops on the main road, public toilet facing the internal road, rentable workshop spaces along the internal road, outdoor eating spaces, and an active public plaza, laundry and drying spaces along the internal road, which can be accessed from the street directly, Anganwadi and outside classroom which can also be accessed from the internal road, a vegetable market along the main road, which can be act as a thoroughfare between the two roads. So this is the plan. So the project it becomes a thoroughfare and an interface between these two streets and starts to respond to that, while the community is on the upper level with some sort of safety and for them, while there is a visual connection between everyone in the community. I'm going to flip. Yes. Uh, some.
Yes, Shreya, you will have to stop.
Just give me 2 minutes. Sorry.
Okay, what you could do is you could just scroll through the remaining slides. Yeah,
okay.
Thanks.
Sections to the site, the study block, how that space can be used at night as well as daytime for the community. Sections through looking at both the streets and how the project becomes an interface between the two streets. A long section showing how the project responds to the internal street and how the community accesses these public plazas and becomes a space for them. And an elevation from the inside, from the inner side of the street, showing how the project becomes it almost becomes like a walk-in space. It is not very monumental in that way. Some views and a view from the internal street. Yeah, I'm done. Thank you.
Thank you, Shreya.
Thank you, Shreya. Shall I put the first question?
Yes.
Thank you very much for the project. I think it's, again, a very important project. I think beautifully researched. And I applaud you very much for it. My question was more, of course, about let's say, the design of the project, the formal execution. Did you consider highlighting it in terms of, let's say, emancipation, make it very expressive and forceful to kind of claim the fact that this group is here? Or did you specifically choose a much more kind of laid back approach and not being so forceful in that sense? And was there a tension with you in the design process about this? I'm very curious to hear more about that.
I think it would be the latter. So through my research, I spent a lot of time on site and I sort of realized the sort of apprehension that the community has with being outside. So be it they're very, even though their work, which is begging or sex work, which sort of makes them interact with people outside, in their personal lives, they are very conserved and they do not really are not very comfortable with interacting with people outside. So I think through my research, I definitely realized that a bold statement or something which would come off very powerfully would sort of not make the community comfortable. So I did definitely want to keep a very laid back and a very slow approach to it, which is why when I'm saying that I'm pushing like the upper level to be where the community sort of bees, is because of the fact that the community is not very there are large parks in the space. They are not really stopped from going there, but they would never go into that space because of the sort of fear of the other people that they face. So which is why even my project, when I'm calling it an inclusive public space, I cannot on a fine day imagine that they would be comfortable with being around everybody, which is why sort of creating this raising my level up to sort of have a visual connection and making my space in a way that they sort of are more adaptive to that space, yet not pushing them beyond a space that they would not be comfortable in. So definitely took an approach to be more laid back in that way. And it comes very much from the site, I feel.
Thank you, very clear. Thank you for that.
I can go next. Shreya, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Thank you. Shreya, thank you so much for that lovely presentation. I thought your architectural question was so clear. I don't exactly remember how it was worded, but I think it was, there was that one slide where you had that one statement. Can you read it out for me? Don't screen share. Can you read it out for me?
Can architecture, the second, enable normalizing the existence of gender non-conforming people within the community?
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting and really powerfully, it's kind of to the point. Can it? Have you been able to answer that question through your project? And there are some other follow-up, not questions, but just thinking out loud. I think you mentioned that we have to think beyond the heteronormative ideas of family, and there are other forms of living together, other kinds of domesticities. And that you wanted to also think beyond the more traditional ideas of Gharana. Were you able to do that? So I'm just thinking about some of these things, and does that change architecture, or is architecture merely a backdrop for new social structures and new forms of organization? So a bunch of different questions together, but the main question is: do you think the answer probably doesn't have to be a yes, but I think that if you can just reflect on to what extent, and if you're convinced about the role of architecture in being able to support these kinds of reorganizations, I suppose.
To the first question, I am myself not very sure, to be honest, but I do believe that my personal take would not be to make a statement in terms of, which is why when I mentioned that there were two options I had to go with. One was an enclave, which would be a space which would be exclusively for the community, in which I would then look at housing them together. But I sort of felt like that would almost exclude them more from the community than it is, which is why I went for a second way of making a more inclusive space. And as with the Gharana system, I realized that when I was working on site, the kind of housing for them is not a, I mean, for us, like for me, say, my house would be my parents, but for them, the house is their Gharana. So the sort of association that the house has with the NGO, where the Gharana sort of comes together, is a very tight connection. So I sort of wanted to keep that connection and not break that, which is why I believe that to make a secluded enclave would not be a solution. For them to be spread out the way they are on site sort of brings out the joyfulness of the community that it is. Sort of bring them together in a space would sort of not do justice to the community. I don't know if I answered your question correctly.
No, that's enough. I mean, I just wanted you to just have a discussion with you about that. I think the restrained manner in which you're handling both privacy and publicity, I think that is something quite interesting, and I take note of that. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Shreya.
Yeah, thank you for the presentation. Yeah, I think the points were, I think Yun talked about the language of the architecture that you generated. And it has a certain familiarity of kind of normalcy, which is very interesting. Do you feel at any place that you find yourself being pulled into, in terms of architectural language, that it's becoming a bit gentrified in places, which will sort of not be the most comfortable? Do you see that in the details when you started resolving it further?
I'm not sure how to answer that, but to some extent, I feel like architecturally, I was responding to the site. I didn't really come with any ideas that this is the kind of language or this is the kind of materiality I want to go with. I, throughout my design process, it was responding to each and little factors that were on site. So there was on site there is a vegetable market on the street which sort of causes traffic on the street. So I was like, okay, I don't want that. I want to push that into my building. So there came a vegetable market. So I think every little factor that happened in my design was through site. There's some sort of benches happening on the pavement of the street. So I wanted to push that into my building and create a more welcoming environment into my building. So at no point did I want the building to feel like it has an entry at all. It had to be porous. It had to become a thoroughfare in the kind of place that it was sited in, and in the thoroughfare is where I wanted the community to sort of become normal.
It's a good thought, yeah.
Yeah.
And I really appreciate how you've restrained yourself uh, not to overwhelm with a kind of language which would alienate them from, you know. So this is a very good position taken. Thank you for the nice project.
Thank you so much.
Shreya?
Yes.
Hi again. So there are two questions out here. One of them you may have answered in your responses to the panelists, but I'll ask it to you nevertheless. And if you feel that you need to elaborate on it further, you may do so. The question has been asked by Isha Mishra. She asks, will creating a different community alienate them even further?
Exactly my point. So that's what I didn't go for. So I did choose a more inclusive approach to sort of make a public space which would be accessible to everyone with certain reservations and subsidies for the community, which would say, for example, a lunch house which would have some sort of subsidies for the community, or an NGO space, or some sort of hostel accommodation with subsidies for the community who are doing vocational training. So that upper level sort of becomes this floating space for the community to sort of spend their time. And I'm also looking at the idea of it becoming a 24 hours thing. So in terms of safety, the community is very, they're out and about for like both during daytime and nighttime, but their safety is at stake all the time. So I wanted to look at that floating space to become this space where they're completely comfortable at all hours of the day, and they're also visual connection from the street, which is why I didn't want to rise my building higher than what it was. I wanted them to feel like they're in a very comfortable space. I wanted the lateral streets to have this visual connection. So at any point, there was safety and there was a sort of comfort level which I didn't want to lose in the project, which is why the sort of simplicity comes with that. I guess I answered the question.
Right, thank you. There's another question from Shalaka. She asks, should or can there be a new architectural language for a historically marginalized community?
I'm not very sure. I do not believe that architecture. I mean, my personal take on this was that the architectural language had to not be imposing. That was what worked for me for the marginalized. So I'm not sure what would that new architectural language really do. I think comfort would be the major factor for any marginalized community. So I think that needs to be kept in mind. But a new language would sounds really interesting, but not very sure how that would work out.
Okay, and we have one last question, and this is for all three projects. That is, I believe, for Ajinkya, Anandita, and yourself, Shreya. The question is, who speaks for whom? As an architect, how does one choose to speak for the other? And is there any way one can? After all, we can never always belong to those we build for. This is a question. These are questions from Rohan. I think any of you can choose to answer.
So I would like to step in that this is a question for all of us actually.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
fantastic question. How can we, I mean, I can imagine a wonderful actor who has to get under the skin of a role and live the life of what they are playing. And I think, I wish we can do that. I really wish in every project that we can imagine ourselves completely as being the other and yet being a designer.
Anindita, you have to unmute yourself.
I said, can I respond to Rohan's question?
Yes, you may, Anindita.
Yeah, so I think this particular question is why, at least in the case of my project, I chose a more speculative approach. Because I felt that in the case of dealing with a community which has this agency, I will obviously come as an architect with my own values and with my own biases. So what I also looked at this project as a way of tackling multiple scales of context. Like in particular, because its lack of agency comes from a social. I felt that there were four real contexts that the community was facing. There was one which was the meta idea, which is that of systemic ghettoization happening across cities, and that is a social construct. It's because of the way in which our politics is framed and the way in which our communities engage with each other. The second would be the very city level context, is the history of Ahmedabad and how that has influenced the community. The third would be the neighborhood scale and how the immediate context around it is reacting. And the final would be the hyper local, where if you picked a site in a limited radius, what were the conditions that were further marginalizing the community? And it is, I think, one way to answer the question as to how do we choose to intervene for communities is also, I think we choose to pick a scale at which we will intervene, and we choose to pick the scale at which we will want to address the problems that the community faces. So in the case of my project in particular, I felt that for lack of a better word, like a community center at the hyper local scale was not really going to bring about any change for a community which has faced systemic marginalization over the years. So, as the architect, I don't believe that architecture has that much power to place a building at a particular site and suddenly imagine that the community is going to be freed of all the marginalization that it has faced. And it is actually in the helplessness of this architecture that you choose to sort of engage with the project at a speculative level. It's because what you can do is probably use architecture more as a means and a method rather than look at it as a way of producing an end product. So if you and this question keeps coming up if we keep looking at architecture as a product, because then we're putting all our we're sort of giving all the importance to that particular building for solving problems which may not be necessarily coming out of a built environment condition, or may not actually be architectural problems. And so in that case, if we are addressing problems and questions of marginalized communities, we might want to choose to engage architecture in a manner which is a means of analysis. And we look at what we have learned over the years as practitioners or as students of architecture as a tool to deal with this problem. So I think, like in the case of the ghettos, I felt that the same thesis could have been done by a social scientist, could have been done by somebody studying political science, someone studying economics, and each of them could actually come up with various solutions of how to address the problem. But what we do have as architects is the tool to analyze the built environment, and therefore we can use that probably as a way of uh, commenting on social conditions, which we hope in the end will, we can just hope that in the end it will create human interactions and human connections that look at architectural solutions beyond itself. Like it's looking for solutions that not the building will provide, but our ability to analyze build space will actually provide. So I feel like when we particularly deal with projects like this, it's interesting to sort of look at the lens at which we come into the project.
Can I answer the Rohan's question? Yeah. So when you put the question as who speaks for whom or can we speak for the other, you're already assuming that the two sides are on the same level and both the sides are being heard, and now let's listen to one side and now let's listen to the other side. And but do you really think that if one particular community has the ability to already speak for themselves and then you choose to then speak for themselves for that community, it's a different case. But when one community has been disenfranchised from any sort of ownership of, be it property or power, and then you say that, oh, let's also take up the space that they are, little bit of space that they are getting, and then speak on their behalf, you're actually occupying space. If there is enough access to everyone, and then everyone can be a designer for and design for someone else. But if is there access for all communities together on an equal field first, and that can only happen through either redistribution of maybe say property or power. That can happen with a mutual agreement of redistribution by people who are in positions of power, or it can happen through a forced takeover or a revolution. And the other, unfortunately, the latter seems to be the most likely one, because the ones in power don't really want to give away their power.
So are you, this is, and it's an important question, I think, Ajinkya. I was just really thinking about it. So you really think about, because, these questions of identity are so much in the air nowadays, and we have constantly this perpetually multiplying identity politics that seems to be in the air. Coming from a community that has also in some senses been seen as marginalized, you realize that even within that community, the divisions are so many and so multifarious. That at the end of which what you end up getting is just a din of noises. The din of noises where actually everybody's speaking at each other rather than speaking to each other. That's generally what at least I have experienced. So my question was really that, is that do you believe then that architects really have, or rather space, I'm not even saying architects because we've saw many imaginations of what architecture could be. Do you think that architecture by its very imagination itself is something that has no role to play in the making of alliances?
Are you asking me or is it?
I'm asking generally. Actually, this is not a specific question. But also to you, I guess it's to all of us as architects themselves, ourselves, who are in some senses all in that sense trying to aim for a democratic world. Okay, and we cannot escape our own identities. None of us can, right? We are all kind of, but each of us is also a multiplicity of identities. We are not only one. I was actually wondering about this kind of play of identity politics and really thinking about really how does one navigate one's own practice? Yeah, Ajinkya, I'm talking about us all. How do I navigate my own practice as being a man, as being kind of being a Brahmin, being all of these things, okay, and understanding all of these, but still thinking that I should be performing something, I should be saying so, I should be performing something. Or do you think, like Gayatri Spivak has suggested, that silence is the only appropriate sort of language in which one can speak of anything, actually?
But even when
because language itself, like you are suggesting, is embedded in power. Now, the problem, of course, is there, right? But like you are saying, if anyone has the power to build, they have the power to speak, they come with power. Right, and with that power comes marginalization. It's an unfortunate fact of language. And what does one do?
But even when Gayatri Spivak asks the question that can the subaltern speak, she ends up speaking on their behalf. She ends up taking the space when Indian.
No, she's not talking. No. Let me be let me be clear. I don't know whether the essay is very clear because I find that essay very difficult to understand. But in my reading of Gayatri Spivak, at least, she is not. She is actually attacking the subaltern group. She's not attacking. She's not speaking on behalf of anybody. She's attacking. If she's attacking anybody, she's attacking herself as the intellectual elite that tends to speak for somebody else. That is her. That is her target. I don't think she's interested, or she's even claiming to speak for the subaltern.
Sure, I agree. But while doing that, she is gaining some capital, some social capital, some realization that this person is attacking themselves. Even that does give certain kind of capital.
You have a point there, Ajikya. You have a point there. I think this is an interesting thing, but I'm just asking a simple question. What does one do? Do nothing.
I don't know either. I'm not like, yeah, but I mean,
Sarah, there are some new questions on the chat which you may want to take, and some responses, I think.
Sarah, you're muted.
I'm so sorry. I'm so
Yeah.
sorry.
Yeah, at least.
Yeah, this seems to be a question for rather in relation to what Rohan had asked. This is a question by Hussein. He asks, how do we evaluate projects that speak to other architects more than they speak to the community they purportedly build for? And he says, he asks, who speaks to whom? In response to Rohan's question, which was, who speaks for whom?
Rohan, you want to say something?
No, I think that really has to do with representation. I think it's an important question, of course, in the way that one is able to communicate ideas within a particular discipline to the people whom we purportedly kind of cater to. And I think the same kind of thing, especially but I think the reason I'm kind of really talking about this because I really think that questions of caste and architecture are something that we have not really dwelt as a community on. I mean, I think when I think about especially the way that I've seen studies on temple towns in sociological studies that have looked at caste, but I've never seen studies of caste in temple towns, architectural circles, whether that's the great temple towns of Srirangam or temple complexes of Madurai. Our tendency is to erase caste out of the way in which we see them or in the way that we read them. The reason I'm bringing this up is because I think it raises a question for our project as well that we hope to start thinking about as far as the Apocalypse Manifesto is concerned. To really start, many of the provocations that these theses are raising, all of them really, are questions I think that that can be looked at the core of what constitutes architectural thought. And a lot of the presumptions concerning form, beauty, who speaks for whom, who speaks to whom, I think does architecture really have a role to play or does it not have a role to play? How does architecture, I mean, these are questions that are so deeply embedded in the power structures of architecture today. Power structures, I mean, not only in terms of the people who are building the power, but building the buildings, but also within the institutional systems that say that this is good architecture, that is not good architecture. Or, there are so many, I guess you could call it presumptions that are deeply embedded and value systems that are deeply embedded in this. So I don't know whether we have the ability to be able to really kind of transform these. That would be, I mean, audacious for us to even imagine that we could. But I think it's important to at least take a good hard look at some of the things that we have often taken for granted. I mean, I was coming back to the idea of, and I think these last theses and all the theses today have been able to, in some senses, raise some larger questions for us to be able to take forward. That's what I felt, and including, like Hussein is saying, the question of representation. That's my 2 bit into it actually.
Yeah,
I think I took up much time anyway. So yeah.
Rohan, what you're talking about, I mean, I mean, it may or may not be connected, but yeah, I think listening to alternate voices, which are may not be from architects. It is actually coming from, whether it's from psychiatrists to sociologists to the society itself. I mean, firstly, perhaps the awareness is very important, and to be, have empathy for pain and justice. Um, and if one is able to internally find resolution, or at least with have a kind um, a kind of strategy to deal with those voices, perhaps we could find, as you mentioned, because I was also looking at a couple of projects, and this is common to most of the schools, that we find fossilized old uh, um, forms and typologies reappearing. So along with it comes its baggage. And unless we acknowledge that the voices have changed, and um, the future has to deliberately answer to the mistakes of the past, we will not be able to generate a language which is speaking in a more kinder way. So yeah, so it's very important to learn from other fields, um, and rather than just be prolific with our skill.
Rowan, if I can quickly add to that, I think that the issues that you raise and that are being raised in discussions are extremely important, but also very, very complex. And I think this complexity also sometimes could lead to kind of paralyzed momentum, that you think like, it's so complex I cannot do anything. Kind of the question you raise as well. And I think that is simply not an option. I think the problems are too big, the challenges are too big to not do anything. And of course, we have to be aware constantly about the power we have, the power that is in architecture, the power that is in language, and the difficulty that brings along. But doing nothing, I think, is not an option. We just have to be aware of all the sensitivities and all the complexity that comes along with the profession. I don't know if that helps the discussion, but that's kind of my view.
All right. Thank you so much. Thank you all. I especially want to thank Rohit, Sayukta, Anandita, Ajinkya, and Shreya for your thesis presentations. Thank you once again to the three panelists, Yon, Shaumitro, and Anuradha, for insightful and valuable comments. Thank you, Rohan, as well. May I now request Pinkesh Shah, Dean of Academic Affairs at KRBIA, to take over from here. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. I think Rohan has already kind of kick-started my job over here, so I think we should just kind of continue, in some sense, let this kind of conversation flow. I'm very happy the chat box has actually come alive, in spite of Sarah's prodding throughout kind of the day to day. And that's something we've been missing as faculty who've designed this kind of colloquium as a forum for conversations, and discourse and dialogue, both for all of us collectively to kind of reflect upon what is kind of being done at the institute. And I would really kind of urge all the participants, the students, the faculty, anybody else who's kind of joined in, maybe even the people who are kind of watching this live on YouTube or Facebook, to kind of post their comments and questions. It's really not about the presentations themselves, but to kind of use that for all of us to kind of think things through. And I think what we kind of just saw in some sense was, what we're kind of really hoping this space becomes, I mean. So, yeah, I mean, what a kind of interesting 3 days it has been, right? I mean, starting with Ole Bauman and Prem Chandavarkar, we've had Paul and Manoj, and then of course our three kind of wonderful kind of panelists here. I would like to start by thanking all of you, actually, Anuradha, Yon, and Saumitro. I mean, really for your not only your kind of patience and time, but also the excitement and the investment in the process you all have shown, and I think this is something I would really like to share with the audience, that they've all actually met more than we've asked them to, in some sense, on their own. They've kind of set up times to get together and kind of discuss all of this, which is really wonderful. And also kind of from the detailed kind of assessment list we've received at the end, with the short list, it's also kind of evident that they've taken that kind of task really, really seriously, I mean, and I would really kind of thank all of you for that once again, as we move in kind of to the kind of question and answer session now, I mean, I do hope more kind of queries do kind of pop up on the kind of chat. I would really kind of urge all of you, I mean, all three of you, to actually be kind of open and kind of honest in your critique, because we see this as a space for all of us at the KRVI to actually kind of grow and kind of improve for what we are actually doing here. And inputs from outsiders who kind of have a certain detachment would really kind of help us moving ahead. So Anuradha, I'm going to start with you. I mean, I'm going to kind of just warm up this space a little bit with some kind of pointed questions, and then maybe we can kind of, as the kind of questions kind of start flowing in, we can take it ahead. In your presentation, at the end of each of the three studios that you shared, there was a manifesto, I mean, probably written after the fact, maybe like a post-rationalization, or, from the learnings of each studio. Personally, I mean, I have a slight problem with kind of manifestos myself, as I feel they've maybe gotten us in this apocalyptic situation we find our world in today in the first place. I much prefer something, more like a call for action or kind of similar things. And Prem, in his lecture, urged all of us architects to look for an expanded and kind of alternate mode of practice. Paul yesterday spoke about, architects having an entrepreneurial kind of attitude, and Ole and Jon again today have kind of reinforced this this kind of the idea of architects to move beyond old architect-client relationships to produce what he has termed an unsolicited kind of architecture. So as you reviewed the student work over the course of the last week, and more intensely over the last 2 days, do you see similar calls for actions, or like mini manifestos emerging through these student projects? So I mean, that's really my question to you.
Thank you, Pinkish. Yes, I mean, I think manifestos, I was using it a little bit more ironically, not in a kind of a didactic manner. But I think that definitely, I think the projects, there seems to be a pattern, at least all the projects, they reflect the spirit of the times. There was a focus on infrastructure, there was a focus on sort of erosion of environment, there was a focus on politics, on representation of minority populations. So definitely we can see that there's an idea of that our co-learners are engaged in the world as it is today. So I was really happy to see that. One observation I had, if I can continue my conversation on this, is that there is a tendency to describe what we should care about and be responsible for as problems and as issues. And I take exception to that, because I don't think there are problems or issues to be solved, and architecture is not just an applied art or science. Architecture is a form of art, it's a form of humanities. Like a lot of the students also have argued that a poet or a novelist could easily have an architectural solution. So I take exception to that. So I think maybe it's just a language that we've inherited from the kind of pedagogies we've also been a part of, the problem solving, the issues and concerns. I think they are things that we need to care about, that there's accountabilities and responsibilities. I think we would be better served if we start to kind of reword I think some of those ideas as not just problem solving. In some of the projects, I thought there was a quick rushing. So there was at least because I'm as an academic practitioner, I'm interested in process. And I felt like the movement from research to program to site to architectural form and solution was very quick. Like there was a quick jump, and maybe I didn't. Maybe the time wasn't enough, and maybe we needed to hear a bit more. But I felt like the movement was always in the same direction. It was always unidirectional. And as a practitioner, I'm always interested for students to kind of engage and develop their own method in a studio. And perhaps the design dissertation being the 2 semester format is a good space to explore that. Is a safe space to explore that, where students feel well. I've done this in the same way for a long time, but is there another way to proceed? And I think I'm interested in, because it's also about developing your own method and your own practice as they get into the industry, whatever kind of industry that might be. The other observation was that I wanted to hear a little bit more about, I suppose, our responsibility, collective responsibility is not just to communities, but also the climate and environment. I wanted to hear a bit more about that. And even though it was embedded in a lot of the projects, I would have liked to have a little bit more conversation, with a bit more concern, I suppose, because I mean it's really a dire situation, and we need to be taking this a little bit more seriously as we move forward over the next 10 years. So these are my broader projects, and I think I'll just close with, I suppose, the conversation that was kind of triggered by the last 2 or 3 projects. This idea of, can we represent others, and I felt like it. Yes, absolutely. To start with, you have to acknowledge and dismantle your own privilege. And that is the first thing you have to do. You have to acknowledge that. You have to dismantle that. And a lot of projects where we speak about people as them and they, that is very, very problematic. So I think we we at least have to accept that we are in a space that is uneasy, and accept that unease, I suppose, as architects. To be comfortable with the unease of not being, not coming up with a solution, but saying that we're in a kind of a dialogue. Even dialogue is a very trite sort of a word, but at least dismantle. And definitely I think you cannot speak for somebody else. I think the answer is a yes and no. Really, you can't actually. Can we have a conversation, collaboration? Yes, but is that still embedded in existing power structures and privilege? Yes, they are. And so I think to start with, you have to dismantle and accept and expose your own privilege, and only then we can start. So, so that was my overall observation, Pinkish. I hope that helps.
Yeah, no, I think great insights and great kind of comments. I think so one of the things you kind of spoke about as process being kind of really linear, I think it's probably a product of the university kind of system we operate in, which actually asks for the research to actually conclude. I mean, you actually have a volume that is bound and kind of assess separately. You kind of put that away, and then you kind of start your design process, and it kind of artificially kind of separates these two. Whereas I think what you're saying is that why can't they really be like feedback loops that kind of keep informing process as one kind of keeps advancing. You do a little bit of kind of your project, and that informs you, and you kind of keep kind of allowing that to grow organically. So but yeah, I think that's something kind of a limitation the students operate under. So in some sense, till the university
not just here, I suppose in a lot of universities they do. To not see the design process itself as a kind of a research endeavor. I think that is limiting, and I hope some institutions can take that forward and say, well, how can we do this differently?
Right, absolutely. I think that's kind of wonderful. So, Shaumitro, just kind of want to kind of ask you actually. Being a practitioner, my question kind of comes to you from a completely kind of opposite side in some sense than Anuradha's. You've demonstrated, through your presentation, the kind of practice that Nisha and you have honed over decades now. One could see the crafting not only of form, space, tectonics, but also the kind of careful crafting of ideas, which kind of drive these projects. Prem spoke extensively about the idea of practice as the need to take philosophy and theory and find ways to turn these kind of into practice, and that we need to move away from these kind of binaries between, say, philosophy and practice in some sense. But he also spoke about the mastery of doing the same thing again and again. Honing your craft like one does, your daily riyas, but not as a kind of a rational kind of repetitive act by itself, but a kind of personal one laden with kind of all these subtleties, which you discover for yourself as a kind of an individual. So as a practitioner, you engage on this, on a daily basis in some sense, but how can students really develop this over their 5 years? And I mean, the next part, I'm not even sure that's a kind of fair question to ask, but do you see this in the crafting of the projects that you have seen, in the kind of past week and in the last 2 days? I mean, or to kind of expand that in the crafting of a spatial practice, I mean, in these student projects. So over to you.
Yeah, I'll begin with, I think the last jury in person at Kamla Raheja, which I did for the final year, which has been a few years, and I can see a little better. I remember at that time I was kind of overwhelmed with the kind of the, let's say, the 10 minutes which the student was given. I think 9.5 minutes was about the thinking process and half a minute was for the project. Although there were lots of drawings and there was hell of a lot of work. So, but there is a shift now. I think the students have been far more, the thought has not reduced, perhaps it has expanded in a good way. But I think they've found a good balance to carry both the things together in a balanced manner. You spoke about music, and I mean, I think as practitioners, we are in a rather weak position. I think Anuradha also talks, and we all spoke about how almost disempowered we are as architects to make a choice of what can be done for justice or for truth, or what would be a utopian idea to realize. That today we have to know how to sing Carnatic. We have to know how to sing Hindustani. We also have to know how to play jazz simultaneously on an everyday basis. So that's, I mean, it can make us schizophrenic, and I think one is trying to keep sanity in some ways across different projects. So, in terms of, I think you first raised the question of 5 years. I would say forget it. 5 years is not possible. Forget it. It's not even a question for me because it's a kind of a lifelong journey, and what you're doing is opening up fantastic windows to the students and opening, and different people will choose different windows to look out from, and they'll find their path, and the profession and the community will be enriched by it. So I wouldn't burden the institution to make people ready for the market. I would say that if they have if they absorb the values and they develop certain skills, I think we leave it at that, and they will find their path, because it's going to be a much longer journey that what they will be engaged in. So they have to find a voice for themselves, yes, and be cautious about when we do certain things that, like when I think you spoke about Prem's talk, and in the past we have seen that the masters always had one language because they were actually from one Gharana, and they were painting the entire socialist project with one language, and it had one resolution, and it got better and better and better. I think it became far more challenging once it became a free market, and the money started moving across the world. So that's where we are, and I think that's good and bad in terms of news for us. Yeah. It's immensely challenging. It's also extremely exciting.
Right. Yeah, I think very true. It'll be kind of interesting to say compare your education, for example, at SEPT, which was, I would think, at least in that time, really kind of obsessed or really emphasized. I think the making or the kind of craft of the object itself. The making of the architecture. And do you see that? Having kind of shifted today, especially like what's the real role of education? That do you really need to move away from the making of the crafting of the building to the making of the kind of ecology in which those kind of buildings sit, eventually? Because I think some of the last three projects also, and I think even some of the ones in the morning today have really kind of opened that up. They were not kind of as obsessed with themselves as about kind of larger questions that they chose to address. So
yeah, I only found certain similarities of resolution, which I can understand at this point of, let's say, the final year of education. And I think it was also pointed out that it gets pretty rushed towards the end to do the needful for the university requirements. So a lot of buildings, although they differ and have very different voices, but they find similar resolutions. So that, I think, is just a conflict with time. I don't think that it's intended or that they cannot do it otherwise. Yeah.
Sure, absolutely. Thanks for that. So Jan, I have kind of two questions for you actually. Communication, in today's time is like absolutely key. Whether through the digital medium or through more kind of haptic environments like architecture or the exhibitions that you kind of curate and design, uh, are our young students that you've seen in the work over the last few days communicating enough and effectively through the mediums that they choose and have at their disposal today?
Yes, thank you, Pinkish. I think that's a very good question, and I can immediately answer that with yes. I think they communicated it very strongly, and I wrote down somewhere that there's this very strong sense of urgency, which really comes through through the computer screen and enters right here in my living room in Amsterdam. So I think the message is very powerful, and sometimes still let's say somewhat rough around the edges. But I think the way of communicating is very strong. So yeah, I'm impressed with that.
That's great. That's great to hear, actually. So being kind of the outsider in the sense that you be the non-architect in the room, but
Yeah.
more particularly in your role actor, you're in this unique position to see kind of emerging attitudes and kind of changing patterns over time. Ola spoke about the idea of expanding the idea of spatial practice, as did Prem in his concern that there are about 20,000 graduate students that India churns out every year. And there just not being enough opportunities for them to engage with. There will not be. We just don't have enough firms to absorb all of them. So, as an international curator and in your kind of experience, what examples and directions do you see emerging across the world, extending this idea of spatial practice? Which a lot of our students say may choose to engage with. And did you see any of these kind of in the student projects, or are they kind of similar or different than the ones you kind of see globally, maybe?
Very good question. Yeah, I agree with you that there's indeed a huge amount of students, of practitioners, of designers, of architects dealing with so much content that is out there and that needs to find a way. And I think the difference that I start to notice either in the Netherlands, Europe, or South America, or wherever I travel is that I see a large amount of designers, architects dealing with materialization and material, not even so much as the end product, but really looking at, in terms of sustainability, the materiality of things. I think that is quite strongly visible. I see a lot of designers trying to, let's say, reframe the value we have towards our products or towards our buildings. So not just looking at, okay, here's the object, but what really constitutes the value that we have, that we put in it. And I think this also comes from a kind of sustainability kind of idea, because the more we care about the product, the more we care about the house, the better we take care of it and the longer it lasts. So these are the things I see. I see that also here and there in the presentations. But what I see also, what I think the other jurors also concluded, is this very strong and social and political and cultural ideas that are out there. I just wanted to compliment the students on the very good research, clearly presented, and I also noticed some of this. I think Sumitra called it the similarity of resolution, but you explained the structure that it comes forth. I particularly, just to round up very quickly, I particularly, of course, liked a project that really managed to go beyond that. Not to downplay any very technical, highly skilled projects which are really in there. And I think the projects really showed a strong sense of urgency that goes beyond the screen, as I noted. So it's a clear struggle with all the complex issues that are in society, that are in the profession of architecture, that are in being a student of architecture. But I also saw this forcefulness that I'm sure that the students will deal with this complexity very good. So I'm confident and positive.
Thank you so much. Anuradha, I'm going to come back to you, one more time before we kind of maybe take some things from, the queries, the questions we are receiving. So, I'm kind of asking you because one is you've been teaching for a long time now, but you also had the kind of privilege of seeing what you kind of wonderfully called in your kind of talk, learning cultures, different kind of learning cultures, across, different kind of continents in some sense. And I'm again going to try and relate this back to, some of the conversations that have been happening in the kind of past few days. So Prem on the first day again spoke about the need for architects to reach out to society and communicate more with them, and warned about the dangers of speaking amongst ourselves too much, So while disciplinary development and advancement is necessary, how do we as a community not kind of really isolate ourselves, from the rest of society? And, for me, this is just kind of extremely personal, but I've always felt that the problem in a sense lies with kind of our pedagogy and our structures, in which we operate. A lot of us in the teaching community kind of pride ourselves, on the intensity and the kind of the rigor and the long hours, and, we kind of valorize sleepless nights, that kind of a 5-year architectural kind of education entails. But if you really think about it, the long hours that our students spend leave them with absolutely no time for anything else in their lives. I know students who've had hobbies earlier, who kind of engaged in learning music or dance or helped community groups, but an education in architecture leaves them with absolutely no time to develop themselves as human beings in some sense. And they end up isolating themselves, not just from their families, their friends, but most importantly from the society at large that we want them to actually eventually work for and kind of communicate with. So I kind of fear that is this disconnection, this schism with society planted right in kind of our educational systems itself. And as an academic, how do you see this? Do you see this as a problem or not? Am I completely off grid?
You've asked me at least 2 or 3 questions folded into one, but I think I'll go to the question about student mental health. And I think it's an incredibly important issue that we have to talk about, and we have to admit the kinds of pressures, the idea of the jury system. We are still doing that in India. We have to get rid of that at some point. We have to kill it. We have to bring in more peer reviews and peer assessments. We have to make assessments less punitive. There's also this idea that you can measure understanding. You really can't. And a lot of times, this idea that education is input and output, it's not that. That's an incredibly mechanized way of thinking, that we are just machines, and that's not how education works. That's not how learning works. So there are some extremely fundamental problems with not just architectural education, with education per se. and none of this is addressed anywhere in any part, any of the debates. So I think definitely we need to have students, and especially students need to be talking about this, and they need to be reminding us and pushing us and saying, listen, this is a big issue, that life and work balance, as we've seen, especially during the pandemic, that has been a huge challenge. The kind of stresses that the students have been through, with the online education, and in any case, the demanding curricula of architecture colleges. I think mental health is an important issue. It's not just a matter of hobbies, but it's a space to daydream. If you have no space to daydream, then how will you really learn? The other thing I always talk about is that I feel, as an educator, there's only so far I can go, because in the end, you talk about design, but if you're not going to challenge the status quo, which I saw a lot of students in the dissertation colloquium doing, but if you're not going to challenge what is a family, who is valued, who is heard, this idea of gender, and I still hear a lot of students always defaulting to he and not she or they. I mean, this is a huge issue. And if the students are eventually going to think about placements and how much I'm going to earn, when can I buy 2 cars and two flats, then as an educator, I've failed myself. I've wasted my time. And so I think it's not about design education, it's education. And I think if we can, keep that fire alive in students, in the end, it is not, to me, it's not about the skills. Skills can be learned, but it's a disposition towards critical thinking. I think that I feel like that's my responsibility as an educator. You're well, and and if they leave our institutions feeling well, feeling good about themselves, and feeling optimistic, but also critical, not just kind of lush. I think I would have served them well in the 5 years that they're with us.
Fantastic. I heard, I mean, I'm seeing Yon and Soumitra nod away. Would you guys like to add to that? I mean, would you want to kind of add anything to that?
No, it's.
I think what.
Go ahead, Yon. Yeah.
Yeah, just quickly comment, or actually, I fully agree with Anuradha just mentioned, that these very small notions that we refer to he, and I hardly don't notice it. I think we have to be super aware of this and really have to challenge that. And I do that as well, and I have to be much more stronger towards myself in that sense. Yeah. So yeah, I really agree on that. Just wanted to add that.
Yeah, I think Anuradha's pretty much hit the nail on the head. Also, it's very interesting, the kind of projects which emerged, a fairly large number from Kamala Raja, and I mean, we know that we've pretty much all of us have been in privileged positions with our education and to the institutions where we have gone. But it is also a kind of sign of the time that a lot of students have picked up projects which they generally, they genuinely care about, and they're concerned, and that perhaps can only happen in from a privileged place. And there's nothing wrong in it, because I feel that the journey begins with voices at all levels, from the voices in the streets to the voices in privileged places. So if they can be connected, I think it's very important that these voices are loud, and it's great that they have entered into the space of architecture.
Yeah, fantastic. So I'm going to take one comment and a question that has kind of come up. It's from Rashmi Verma, and she asks, why do we need a winner? Yeah, so just to clarify, we don't have a winner actually. This was something we used to do till last year, but this cycle onwards, we have kind of consciously asked only for 3 kind of commendations, which to the jurors kind of really stand out. So, I mean, there is kind of going to be no winner this cycle onwards, you know. She also says that thesis is a coming together of varied inquiries that are researched upon and developed while trying to find answers to the questions asked. Each of the projects discussed came with its own set of challenges, processes, and scope within the larger limiting university umbrella. The colloquium is a great space to discuss projects and have conversations about the larger questions that these projects pose. After all this deliberation, why do we again fall back into the trap of merit by announcing top three? Okay, so that's something for us to think about even further. We will kind of keep that in mind going ahead. Uh, can I request the faculty if they have anything they would like to add, if they can put on their cameras and mics to kind of conclude? Rohan?
No, sorry, I said enough. No, but I think it is. I really think that a lot of interesting points were raised by all our three panelists and by many of the students, and I think it's important for us to, be able to kind of see ourselves and the question of privilege is very much a part of the part of the problem of architecture because of the very fact that it represents power. Unfortunately, almost most of the time. And even our spaces of validation, our spaces of understanding what is called architecture also comes from that very position of privilege that says, okay, this is architecture and that is not architecture. And we have those sorts of issues that we have to deal with. I think if one has to really think about privilege and architecture, one has to, there's a lot of work to be done, to be honest. And a lot of the points that were raised by many of the theses really raised those questions. You are left with these kinds of questions, which are important questions that I don't think I have been able to necessarily come to terms with. And maybe that's the good thing. Maybe that is where we should be. Confused and afraid and slightly anxious. But also, I don't believe, like Jon said, I don't believe that we should be just saying there's nothing we should be doing. Because in my head, that would be in many sense a retreat back into yourself. And that is an easy place to be. I think the place of anxiety is the space of encounter. And is the space where you take a risk and you know you're going to be attacked by somebody. But being willing to take that risk because you believe in a certain imagination of public discourse, a certain imagination of what it means to be part of society in some sense. And understand that is a point of privilege that you're speaking from. But I believe as an architect, to be able to retreat into merely giving shape to what the existing forces of capital or fascism are asking our cities to be, would be in that sense to give up on not the mandate of architecture, but the mandate of being alive, just generally in terms of thinking that we want to make a world that is more fair. What role we take as to do that, I wouldn't know actually. I wouldn't have the audacity again to suggest that.
There's just a comment, Ainsley, before I kind of jump to you. I think it's probably in response to Shaumitra's thing that, all about privilege. All the voices here are not privileged from a privileged place, but some are here from reservations. 50% of our students do come from, reservations. So I think just a clarification which Ajinkya has kind of posted. Ainsley, over to you.
So I kind of agree with Rohan, and I think Jon actually mentioned that as students we actually have to do architecture. So I don't know whether Jon wants to clarify itself because he had said that you shouldn't kind of take the back seat or say that I don't know what to do and how to do. Of course, right now as students, if there are final year students listening in, as students. You have the opportunity to do speculative projects and you have the opportunity to actually make some of the projects real. So, tomorrow if a client walks up to you and says, how do you do it? And you have these values which Shomitra was talking about, how do you actually manifest it architecturally and the architecture embodies the values so as to create change. One can debate whether architecture can do it also, so that's another issue. But I think if a client comes up to you and you think that this is a necessity for a particular community or a group of people, how do you do it to the best of your ability? Whether you're doing it on their behalf or whatever. So I mean that's why I raised that point with Ajinkya that of Francis Cray, where he actually educates, empowers, and helps the community to kind of build institutions. And if Ajinkya could have taken that stand rather than actually do a building which these parallel wall kind of things, I mean, that could have been an interesting stand, and automatically the resultant manifestation would be very different. So, I mean,
is there anyone else who would like to kind of add to this?
I really think that that the students don't necessarily show, let's say, a doubt in the tools that they have. I think that they really develop this very strongly, but it's more in the complexity of the profession that we're discussing, and indeed the role you have, and the discussion of power in this. And I fully agree with Rowan that this is something that is frightful or difficult to deal with. But yeah, we have to kind of deal with to go on, and yeah. So I thought that was very well said.
100%. Yeah.
So before we whisk all our three kind of panelists away to another private chat room to kind of decide the three, are there any closing comments you guys would like to add to what has been said? Because you just come back and then announce the three. So if there's anything all three of you would like to add.
Well, just want to thank all the students for really taking something which was close to their heart, and the conviction and the work that they produced to whatever level of success, because I think that doesn't matter. It's more that they were actually honest about it and went on the journey, which was very exciting for us to see. So thank you to all the students and the faculty, of course, who have been on the same journey.
Yep.
Agreed.
Anuradha, anything, or shall we move?
I think yes. I think that the idea of choosing the top three. So I suppose we'll choose three. We won't say whether it's top.
Yeah.
I think we'll do that. We'll choose three distinctive. It's a very unpleasant thing to say this is good and this is better and this is fine.
Luck, I would say.
It's been a great journey. I suppose I've worked with Soumitra before as a juror at another institution, but met you all for the first time. It was great interacting with all of you, I think, and really good debates. And so we'll come back in about 15 minutes.
Yes, please. Can I please request Rutika to please take over from here to kind of introduce the electives exhibition?
Yes, thank you.
All right,
and
see you back.
We'll see you. 6:15.
All right, we'll see you back then.
Yes.
Bye. Take care.
Bye.
See you.
Have a nice.
Yes, Rutika, over to you.
Thanks, Pinkesh. At KR, electives are seen as an opportunity to engage and explore in different domains in architecture and its allied fields. So the University of Mumbai allows 10 electives to be taken by the student during the course of 5 years. These operate under the 4 verticals of theory, culture, methods, and systems, which ensures a balance between breadth of learning along with the depth developing their different interests. We believe that electives offer students an opportunity to chart their own trajectory based on their interests to develop their own positions as individuals and architects. For winter electives March 2021, a total of 17 courses were offered to the students across all years.
These electives were designed and imagined under the KRMLS theme of Apocalypse Manifesto, where the courses were curated addressing the theme. They were conducted from 4th March to 11th of March 2021 across the span of 7 days. So we present you all KRVI Winter Elective Exhibition. I would like to navigate you quickly through the exhibition.
Brutika, sorry, the screen is not being shared. Huh?
Yes, one second, I'm sharing the screen. You can see the screen, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So as explained by Sandeep yesterday, you can access the website, and in the events tab, we have exhibitions. So today we present to you KRVI Winter Elective Exhibition, which showcases the work of all the electives. And as we enter the exhibition, so the format mainly is that each elective, so we have these all electives which were being offered, and you can see them with the codes and their names. Then the format that we are trying to present is, yeah, sorry, one second. Yeah. So first we have introductory panel wherein you can, which talks about the title of the elective, the instructor and the students who took the elective, and there is a link attached to it which kind of gives you the whole description of what the elective was about. And then we present 6 entries from each elective. Each panel will have a link attached to it, which either be the link to a video that supports the panel or a Miro board that tells you about the process of the elective. Yeah, and if at all, there has to be, one second, yeah, if at all you have to see a particular elective, then in this tab there is list of works, and you can choose which elective work you want to see and directly navigate to the whole exhibition. So and even as elective coordinator, from myself and on behalf of my colleague Neeraj, I would like to thank all the faculties who took interesting electives and helped the students to kind of navigate through different ideas. A special mention and thanks to the student council who had put up this exhibition, and especially the archival team who has put up this exhibition in such a short time, and of course all the students who kind of actively participated in all the electives. So thank you. Over to you, Venkesh. Hello.
I think Pinkish might be in the other room with.
Okay.
Maybe
okay.
I don't know.
Yeah.
No, so I'm not. I'm here because none of us are there. Yeah, to.
I thought you were there. I guess you have to wait, right, for them to come back.
Yeah, I thought, Rutika, you take much longer to take us through everything.
We have the time now to.
You were allocated. We were allocated.
We have time to deliberate without the panelists. All the students here.
Yeah, I mean, I would have liked to hear more of the students participate. I don't know if it's just the medium, or I think normally when we are all sitting in the auditorium, there is a little bit more interaction, right? I mean,
yeah. I think it's. I think it might be the medium. I think it really might be the medium. Hopefully next year we won't have to do it on this medium, and we can actually meet physically.
Absolutely, I would really hope that happens. So
there's too much strangeness in this medium. So sometimes you want to say something, but because of the way that because of the interface, it comes across differently. So it's really kind of strange. Yeah, exactly, Hussain. Platform doesn't allow non-presenters to speak. You have to be made to speak or something like that, right?
No,
is that how it works?
Yes, we have to align speakers, yes.
Because the thing is that if you give everyone the choice, then someone might leave their mic on and then leave the room, and background noise and all that jazz.
So Ankush, is it possible to do it now so you can allow them to speak?
I can in fact allow everyone to speak now.
And it'll be dead silence because no one's there.
No, it'll be damn good. Then the names are announced, there'll be big applause. Everybody can clap and there'll be sound for a change. You don't have any idea.
Ankush, why don't we try that?
So now everyone's allowed to unmute.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes, now everyone's allowed to unmute.
Hussain, you can go first, and
since you are cribbing that you are not allowed, yeah,
it'll be fun.
No, I have nothing to say. I just wanted everybody to. You know.
We made this democratic. Anybody can speak, not only you. Everybody has been given the same equal rights to speak today. Now.
We're waiting though. But students have anything to say. Rashmi, you want to kind of elaborate on what you're saying in that thing? Thesis is coming together. You think you've said it all. And how many of you all agree with Rashmi?
Yeah, you all can please use all these emojis which you all have, which I saw some of you use.
I made my point, Rohan. It's a discussion that we've also been having parallelly, and a lot of people sort of echo that thought that why do we have to, come down to, like you just said, that there's no winner, which is something great from this year. But until last year, we always had, 3 or one at the end of it that is chosen to be the best thesis, which is something I felt was coming down from the conversations that we were having, which were much larger. So, yeah.
Yeah. So there is this thing, I mean, I agree with you actually in many ways, but, to be honest, as somebody on this side, when I'm looking back, let's say I'm looking back over the past 15 years of the school in terms of what its interests have been, just generally, or what is it that architects, students generally have been concerned about. And if I look back over the past 20 years and I just look at what have been called, and I agree with you, that's a completely not necessarily accurate kind of way in which we can even think about what is the best thesis. That itself is a joke. But it does tell us in some senses like the kind of trajectories at a certain point, like a certain kind of interests that were there at a certain time. And then me, when I'm here today and I'm looking back at the time when, let's say, Kalpit, Dipti, etc., one thesis, and little later on, I'm able to kind of, in that sense, be able to understand, this is what the changes in the school have been. So that's the only use that it has. In some senses, these projects become representative of value systems that the school has at a particular time. And we can criticize those value systems.
But also, Rashmi, you have to understand, and I think all the other students also should understand that even in the choice of the 10 citations, it is really the kind of the leanings of the jury and their interests, and that's why they select a project. So, of course, we have a mixed bag of jurors. But if you put the same set of 60 to another set of 3 jurors, I mean, the choices might vary. So it's quite obvious that some projects which we as faculty at the school think are worthwhile may not be what someone else thinks of. And if you have seen over the last 3 or 4 years when we have had these kind of, or the inception of this kind of thing, it is really the bias of the jury to kind of pick a project, and the project at one forum may be really commendable, but at another forum might just get missed out or not even looked at, or not even discussed. So I think as you go on in life also, when you actually get into the practice and you pitch for projects and you do competitions and you do all these kind of things, I think it's really based on the jury who has been selected that kind of determines the worth of a project. So I don't think it should be a setback for any student. And as a mature young graduate, you should be made aware of it. So.
Yeah, but Ainsley, I don't think Rashmi has a grudge with who gets selected.
No, both. Even the best 3. I mean, it's the bias of the jury.
No, we know that. We are fully aware of that. I don't think that she's asking about who's getting selected.
She's saying, why are we selecting 3 at all?
Is selection necessary?
Exactly.
That
exactly.
is the point.
I think we'll get there. We're all kind of learning as an institution. We made a change, right? This year we made several changes, so we'll get there. I mean, I think it's all a part of a process.
It's just getting better, and maybe value systems change, the way thinking changes, whatever. I mean, it's all part of.
But Rashmi, it would be nice if we were able to develop a format where students felt more involved or were able to kind of participate better in the process of not only these 10 conversations, but actually the whole thing, somehow we don't seem to be able to evolve a culture of that kind of openness or conversation. Maybe it is exactly like how even Ajinkya was saying, that the nature of the space itself privileges a certain kind of language, so a lot of people feel like they cannot speak. Maybe that's a problem. Can there be a suggestion for a new format entirely of the colloquium, is the question.
Yeah, and I actually thought that this time, having the peer evaluation, that the students themselves would figure out kind of means to have these conversations, Rohan, that you're talking about, that within themselves at kind of a year-wise scale, so, it's amongst their peers that they could, evaluate, debate these kind of projects internally. So I really don't know how that has happened.
No, but
maybe
Pinkesh, that requires a culture of discussion in the school from the beginning. It can't happen that at the colloquium you expect that everybody else to discuss.
I think, isn't that what we all do? And this is what 5 years of being here enables them to do that. I mean, I think if they're not able to, we all need
but we have to really look at our own systems. We have to really look at our own systems and what we privilege in our system and what we sort of leave back. So, I mean, that's all.
Yeah, I think, but there is a point. I mean, there's a reason why, even at this point, that it's still just the four of us talking. That the kids are not yet kind of speaking. Something's happening.
The fact that even if we look through all the surnames that are present here, let's see how what skin colors are present here. These are things which we don't think about, but there are certain things which are extremely intimidating. If the faculty room had more of representation of people from the marginalized communities, people would be more comfortable with at least speaking with them personally, and then maybe this discussion, the space of discussion could happen. If we even see who gets elected in the student councils, or even if who is the one who speaks the most, does not necessarily always carry. Let's say even caste identity is a very different thing. You don't get to it before maybe encountering a few questions. There are certain things about, but like some basic things like which are like skin color, or even say your ability to be able to express yourself, to say that, oh, my pronouns are they them. They will not be accepted in our, even in our college, even in today, as progressive as we might want us to be. So it's like it's not the blame is not at all on students to not speak. It's really on
not
the
a blame
of
I think it's not a blame. It's a question that really I agree with you that there is a certain privileging of language, and you're right, caste, gender, very much that is at the heart of the architectural profession entirely, and I think that is the reason why we should be having these conversations. If you thought that we are really, and if any way we are trying to blame the students, we don't intend to. I'm sorry if that's how you felt. It's really a matter of blaming ourselves to many extents, to not be able to kind of make that kind of space and think about how we can. And if there are the suggestions about how we could do that, and I think you have made some important points, is that being able to broaden the space, for example, would be an important thing to do. Yeah, but it's still tough to do. I mean, it would be good to do with it. It's something that we have to consciously work towards.
Like even
one of the things we should be working.
Like Rohan, like something like Ola said, room to maneuver. Room to maneuver. not only in the academic space, but also when we step out, we are representation first of ourselves, the self. Okay, so then we are representation of the community, and we are representation of our family. Okay, but so something that Ola said and what Ajinkya is pointing out and what we are discussing, I'm saying maybe within the structure of the school also, how and what Shirish is pointing out and how and what Pinkish is also establishing about how we have changed or we have modified the way we have even conducted this colloquium by itself. So I'm saying the room to maneuver is something that we need to, like yesterday also Paul and Manoj's thing also, they expanded on the idea of flexibility, or the idea of Paul spoke about the idea of entrepreneurial also in that light. But I'm saying that we might have to see how we systemically insert certain kind of spaces for this kind of culture to be brewed, so that by the fifth year then there is a certain kind of thought process. It's not just one way. Okay, there will be many ways to tackle a similar situation, a similar condition. There might be many voices to have in a forum like this. So so it is nice. I mean, I'm glad this is happening. I'm really this today. The whole event was amazing. Like amazing in the sense because of the openness that the school establishes and allows. Not every school does this. I'm telling you because I have not studied in the school. I've done my master's here, but I've come. My graduation is somewhere else. So I'm glad this is happening because this is sometimes it goes missing. We finish our 5 years and we are all gone, and then so sometimes so I'm glad this is happening. So I think it is important for us to also look at how we make space. So I don't know an answer for it, but I'm thinking as we are speaking here.
Srishti has something to say.
Also, meanwhile, sorry, while we take up this discussion, Pinkish, maybe could you just get in touch with the jurors and ask if they're able to join the meeting?
They're not back yet.
Maybe they're still having a discussion.
Yeah, let them.
We'll also have a discussion. Srishti Shah, we could probably introduce a symposium as a platform to start a discourse on varied as well as all dissertation projects rather than the current system where the method of choosing a project is left to the biases of the jurors. This has already been adopted by another architectural school and become a huge shift in the value systems of KRVI as an institution. Where we've discussed all dissertation projects, 80 of them.
88. I think the jurors are back.
So So Anuradha, you're back, right?
Samitra is just joining us. He's sending you the shortlist and then he will join us.
Okay.
He's sending. Actually, Anuradha, if you have it, you have to announce it. So
he's sending it to.
Yeah. I'll do that, and then we'll give our comments together.
Sure, great.
Yeah, I think Srishti, part of the problem is that part of the problem is scale. That the idea of it would be maybe we can kind of break it up into like sections. No? Don't do all 88, and you build sort of communities of conversation. Maybe that would help. Maybe communities of conversation that are vertical across from the first to the fifth, and not only within the fifth year, and not necessarily with only the panelists, like another kind of community of conversation, perhaps, maybe something like that. We can think about it. Let's sit together and think about it.
Yeah. It's like we had 88 projects, but only 88 students, so 93 students, only 60 sent in their work. So,
Ainsley, I have a suggestion for that. We can do it like academic conferences. You have parallel sessions and you have different presentations happening, and students can choose which session they want to attend. They can be systematically organized, and there can be discussions for each session and so on. So that could probably have 88 projects in less time.
That's a good idea.
That'll be like a major planning event to organize. I mean, maybe the online space actually allows for that, you know. No,
Allows
that's
it,
the
yeah.
online
Yeah.
space could do it. I mean, college we wouldn't have the space, but here we could. I mean,
Should be fun. Yeah, I was just thinking if we get the students involved in the planning of it, I think 88, like how Hussain is suggesting, is very easy to manage.
Let's think about it.
Physical space.
Maybe we don't do. Maybe we don't do it all onto like as this kind of slot. We do it as scattered workshops.
Awkward silence.
No, I'm not awkward. I was just thinking.
so I can see Yon has joined as well. So I think Shaumitro is still to
Yes, we're just
come
waiting
on.
on Shaumitro.
Yeah, sure.
I wonder whether the discussions. I guess they would have been if the discussions were held in physical space. Whether the I guess it would be different. I mean, I don't know whether right now, for example, out of the people who are attending the meeting, they are all having separate chats on their WhatsApp phones about what the discussion is. Otherwise, that is possible, right? In these kinds of silences, I'm sitting and chatting with my neighbor. ये क्या किया है? ये कितना गंदा project है? ये क्या बोल रहा है? You know, all of those things would have happened. I wonder whether that's what's happening right now. That they are frantically typing away with their.
I'm sure they are. Let them.
Of course. Yon is having lunch.
Can you tell? It's nice this confined space you have, but you hide all your food and your things.
Such a little wall behind me.
So we always catch Ainsley kind of munching away on something or the other through all our meetings. How much ever he may try to hide it, he's always chomping away. So you being more discreet, but I must say.
This is quite, I mean, I find it in many ways, you know, sometimes when I ask the students to turn their cameras on to have a conversation with them, because otherwise it's like really talking to a blank wall. But sometimes when they turn their cameras on, I feel like as if I'm invading their privacy. It's a very strange thing. I'm suddenly seeing their homes, you know. Otherwise, when they are within the school, they are, you have an ability to leave your home behind and become something else, when you are in the school. But here, that escape or that reconstruction of your identity is just not possible. You are in your home, and as soon as you turn the camera off, you're back to being a son or a brother or whatever you are at home. Don't have any time away from that.
And you find it more fascinating than scary, or?
It's kind of scary actually, because I mean scary. I think it's a little problematic also, because I think that like there is a advantage to distancing yourself from your home.
Yeah,
it's important to be able to do that, to be in another space physically and mentally. That I just think it's important, because I think there's learning there, which is cannot be explained. Information wise, you'll get everything online. All of that stuff is. You can even create a design project online, but it's not only about that. Now, there's something else as well that's part of education, I think.
So before we started this semester, we actually did a Google kind of survey of what did the students think of the earlier semester, and many of them actually liked the idea that it was this Microsoft Teams gives you the possibility to record the discussions. So very often when we had our design discussions, it would be recorded and they would go back to it and take notes and make changes, etc. Some of them would also attend the lecture separately and take notes and use it for revision. So there are some advantages of this thing, and they found it more focused. So there's lots of things which are good about this.
There's a comment, Ainsley from Darshana, which says the online platform allows to be more focused for such discussions, so works better in this aspect. So, yeah, many things for us, all of us, to kind of learn from. If you want to call Shomitra,
okay. I think we should probably just check in.
Wait,
I haven't received an email.
Ankush, can you check if he's in, or?
Yeah, he's not in yet. I just checked.
Okay, he's not. Okay.
Darshan has added something. No, Ajinkya has added something. Maybe when we have a physical discussion. Yeah, agreed.
I think the mail has been sent by Shumitra. Anuradha.
Did you ask him to join though?
Yeah, he said he would. Just a minute.
Ajinkya, I mean, if you have the time, I'll tell you an interesting story about that.
You have 2 minutes, Rohan, to tell your story if you want to. Somebody join.
Ajinkya, that we are planning on doing many interviews here as part of the Manifesto building, to do interviews with many architects, like 100 architects, about what do they consider good architecture. It's actually a very simple question, like what is the good in architecture? Simple question, but not that easy an answer to find. So it was a very simple thing. So we gave them, when we were having discussions, we had only 4 or 5 so far. So we told some architects that, listen, okay, you have the option of staying anonymous. You can tell us your answers, and if you want, we can say that these are answers of a general person with no identity. Like, okay, well, some people, Pinkish might say, I'm fine with my name being published. There were a lot of people who was like, I want to tell you, but I don't want my name to be known. And a lot of them said, we would prefer that. I think even within architecture itself, there is such a fear of, in the circles, even within architects, there's such a fear of being seen as somebody who's not saying the right thing. A hegemony, as it were, of a particular way of speaking and all, that I think anonymity is quite useful.
There's the man.
Oh, great.
Thank you.
Yep.
All right, so should we go ahead?
Yes, please, Anuradha. Please do the honors and announce the winners, please.
All right. So in no particular order, we're doing it room-wise. So we've got A02, project A02, RA Intercity. We'll just come to the comments from the jurors in a moment. The second project that we looked at was from room B, B17 project number, the paradox of recognition, the case of the Hijra community in Malwani. And the third project that we shortlisted was from room C, which was C07, Hate Space Ghettos, the City Within the City.
which is.
So I think we can maybe just. I think we kind of we agreed that these were not. It's not top anything or best of anything, but we thought that these were kind of three distinctive projects in terms of attention to ecology and environment, social issues and communities, and also political issues. So we thought that they kind of represent. In some way, that the distinctiveness of the kind of projects that we've seen at Trivia this year. So I'll open the floor and ask Soumitra and Yon to comment as well.
Yeah, I think apart from what you already mentioned, Anuradha, is that all three projects, even though very different in relation to the subjects they're dealing with, show this urgency, show that they're very skilled in how to deal with this urgency and how to translate into to a design, and show some way or another also this radicality, which I think is necessary and is almost essential in projects like these. So that I just wanted to add. Soumitra?
Thank you. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. So I think these, firstly, I think congratulations to all the students who are finishing, and secondly, for those who were shortlisted, and recognizing these three was not the easiest, and it never is, because I think everybody is dealing with very, very different things, and as we mentioned, that there is a substantial skill, and that's pretty unique to Kamla Raheja actually, to find a balance between thinking about things and have the capacity to articulate them in building to a fantastic extent. It's quite amazing to see that, the kind of balance. Yeah, of all three projects, I think exhibited tremendous conviction in the cause and the need to do it, because it started with the need, and it went along to really unfold. I think the interesting thing was more about the unfolding, which appeared in the projects. And I think that's perhaps the space where our discussions take place. It's the interest in the unfolding. So yeah, so I think congratulations to the three commendations.
Great. Can I request all three of them, Suraj, Anandita, and Shreya, to please put your cameras on so we can all clap for you? Anandita, are you there? Shreya, are you here? Suraj?
I don't think they are. Are they?
No, there. Two of them I can see. Where's Suraj?
Congratulations.
Suraj is there, actually.
Yeah, Suraj is here. Finally, yeah. Great. Excellent.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all for your time. I'm just going to call on Rohan formally to kind of propose the vote of thanks and kind of to end about how we kind of plan to take the Apocalypse Manifesto ahead in the next few months. That's a difficult one.
There's always that problem. Everybody seems to have a real problem with the pronunciation of the apocalypse. And I think maybe that's a good thing. If you can't pronounce it, maybe it will never come. Anyway, thank you, Pinkish. Congratulations to all the students, everyone who presented, attended, participated in the discussions of the first episode of the Apocalypse Manifesto. We see it as, in cinematic terms, as the prequel, and maybe we'll get subsequent kinds of episodes as over the next 3-4 months. We intend to end sometime in December the building of the Apocalypse Manifesto. Well, the title is, as is meant to be slightly humorous and also meant to be audacious. It's intentionally provocative. This is a project because we know that we hope also that cannot completely succeed. The point is indeed for us to aim and know that it will definitely miss, but it will show us a way, like a flare gun at night, like in the flash of the flare gun in the darkness of night, you can see a little bit of the road, and we hope to kind of follow that road until the darkness envelops us again and overwhelms us again. So that's generally the idea of the way we are conceiving of this apocalypse manifesto. Ola's keynote, of course, called for us to think of measure in and by for architecture, and really thinking that through. And Prem's response was to be able to really think about that from our particular reality in India.
Yeah. You don't understand how Google Meets and Teams works, no?
I think Mamta, you may have to
No, that was Anandita.
Yeah, so she's Anandita. Okay. Well, the first thing we need to figure out is the measure of teams in and by and for architecture, and Prem's response to it from our particular context and reality. What I thought was nice is that we had a conversation after that with the past director and the new director of the school, Anirudh Paul and Manoj Parmar, and that was really enlightening to really think about what were the commonalities and what are the sorts of directions that the school has taken from its inception to today and into the future. In many ways, this opening salvo was a great introduction to enter the conversation around design dissertation that we've been listening over for the past 2 days. Because, the thesis is such a distillation of the ideas that the students have been grappling with and the way that they have seen themselves over the past 5 years, and as a threshold into a future. In many ways, the thesis becomes like a utopian place to look inwards and outwards, to figure out one's own position and possible directions that one needs to take. And the anxiety around thesis is, I think, one of the strengths of it as well, because it really is the place where one is forced into a position outside, in many ways, the what is seen as the isolated world of the academic. And it was great to kind of have these conversations punctuated with the talks from Shaumitro, from Yon, and from Anuradha, really talking about the different ways in which they bring their own. Shaumitro coming from the world of making buildings, Anuradha from the world of academia, and Yon from his curatorial work. It was great to kind of have these inputs into these conversations as well. And along the way, we of course have had, conversations around practice, history, identity, responsibility, and around, not just the teaching of an architect, but of course architectural practice itself, questions of power that we discussed today, for example. So all of these seem to have laid down some of the trajectories for the next questions we can begin to ask in the school for the making of this apocalypse manifesto. They include, questions of the relationship between man and nature, man, again, the very idea of the man, questions of inclusion, the ethics of architectural practice, and, and maybe other forms through which one can imagine what architectural practice itself can be. Over the next few months, we hope to elaborate on some of these through a variety of different forms. Maybe some closed room discussions, seminars, workshops, maybe some courses within the school will address it quite directly. These will be augmented with an ambitious project of interviews that I mentioned earlier that would be held by students and faculty from the school with around 100 architects of different generations from all over the country. These will be compiled together in some way to form what can be called the Apocalypse Manifesto. We don't know what form that is going to take, and I guess that will emerge as we begin to figure out what are the kinds of conversations that we are engaged with. But anyway, that is only the final discussion. More importantly is the making of the Apocalypse Manifesto hopes to release discussions, debates, conversations, heated arguments perhaps, and that is really what the purpose of this audacious and ambitious claim is, the making of a manifesto. We hope to discover embedded presumptions, to challenge debate about our new value systems, perhaps maybe even suggest new modes of practice and validation that need to be evolved for us to claim and position architecture as a craft for the celebration of the world and of life itself. So, to end part one of the building of the Apocalypse Manifesto, I would like again to extend my thanks to everyone involved, especially Ola Bowman, Prem Chandavarkar, Anirudh Paul, Manoj Parmar, Shaumitro Ghosh, Anuradha Chatterjee and Yon Konyan for their talks, the thesis students who contributed the work for the colloquium, and the audiences, both the students and the faculty, the organizing team from the student body and faculty, our staff, and finally the management of the school and the Kamla Raheja Foundation for their support. We will keep you informed about the future events as far as the Apocalypse Manifesto is concerned. We do have an Instagram page called the Apocalypse Manifesto, very creatively. Do join it, and we hope to see you soon. Thank you all again. And I guess bye-bye.
That's the end. Bye. Thanks a lot. Bye, Leon. Bye, Chomitro. Bye,
Thank you, everyone. Take
Anuradha. Yeah, bye. Thanks a lot. Thanks for your time.
Chomitro, you're saying something.
Yeah, I think I have the evening free. Otherwise, we would be at Cafe Mondegar by now.
You have to go to Bob's place, right? Soumitra, you have to go to Bob's place. He told us, right?
We will.
We can have the next colloquium there.
Yes. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Ron. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Thanks for your time.
Thanks, Anuradha. Thanks.
Bye.
Bye-bye.